What's up, everyone? Normal Show host Rob Noerr. Hope everyone's having a good day. You know, I'm colorblind. It's a true thing. Not completely colorblind, but I have troubles with certain colors. I really thought this hat and this shirt matched grays, but I can see now that the hat is significantly lighter than this shirt. I bought a new hat today. I spent a little money on myself. $7 for a gray hat. It's nice though. I like the ones that are fitted without the little snaps. So this one fits my big head just nicely. And I said, I'm going to purchase that. They had hats for $3 too. You can't beat that. $3 a hat. Hope you're all having a fantastic day. I know I am. Had a great day. Went out with some family. Had some lunch with them. We went to Perkins. And they got the Perkins in our town's got the claw machine right by the entrance. And my son loves the claw machine. That's right. Super chatting for a new hat. It paid off. The $7, well spent. So we did not win at the claw machine, but we had fun. Also, I think gray's a good color for me since my hair, what's little of it, and my beard, even my mustache. The only thing is, so the beard, the gray, whatever, it's coming in. The mustache, I don't know if you can see, it's still pretty brown. It's, in fact, a little lighter on some of the edges here. But there's like a few grays right under the nose. And sometimes it looks to me like I got like sauce or something in my mustache. You know? Bandit, that's not true. I had a coworker. I'm not making this up. I had a coworker that probably could win at a 25% clip at the claw machine. It was ridiculous. I didn't believe him because doing home health care, I didn't work the days my coworker worked. And so I would come into the house and there'd be like a new stuffed animal. I was like, oh, where'd you guys buy that? And he'd be like, oh, I won it in the claw machine. And I didn't believe him till one day we went out with the clients and we went to like an arcade and they had claw machines there. And I watched him win like 3 times on like $12. It was insane. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, the grout fit, the gray. Yeah. So I thought, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for today's show, but I thought, you know what we should do? Let's make Fridays open call-ins. Now I baited people with the baited title there, where I said we'll wreck some lefties, and I would love to wreck some lefties. But we can take call-ins from non-lefties too, that either agree or disagree with me. So what I'll do is I'll put the link to my Discord up. People can join my Discord chat if they like, and we'll just go. We'll talk about whatever people want within reason. It is a distinguished look. I totally agree. But I had a good time last night doing the State of the Union, and I got to say thank you. I got 19 people watching me on X again. Now, I thought, and what I used to do when I used to do the X spaces, and I could do that. I could set it up. Where's Peace going to debate the SCOTUS decision? Too busy kissing Biden's ass from his mediocre speech last night. But I could set up a spaces because I think on the spaces it's less intimidating. And not only is it less intimidating for just people to want to chime in, but I think it's easier technologically wise than some people that maybe aren't familiar with using Discord. Any thoughts on the State of the Union? Well, we covered it last night. We covered the majority of the State of the Union. I think the take that I had that I haven't heard anyone else in the country have is I have to give the devil his due and say, you know, for me, the speech was always going to be about could Joe Biden get through it without any significant gaffes? And I think he did. I think he largely got through, and I'll give credit when it's due. I'm not saying it was a phenomenal written speech or a phenomenally delivered speech, which are two different things, but I thought it accomplished what Biden needed it to accomplish. When you're in the establishment like Joe Biden, everything is going to carry water for you. The media will carry water for you, sort of the algorithms, all of that stuff, they'll carry water for you. So all you have to do is not make a fool of yourself in front of people and let the propaganda work. That's why Joe Biden works best when he's in a basement, not answering questions, not visible. When he does worst is when people could see him. And so for this to be a situation where he had to get out in front of cameras, they had the right drug cocktail, and he was able to get it through it primarily gaffe-free. And you might say, well, that's bad for Trump if you're a Trump supporter. I disagree. I see it completely the opposite. I still think that Joe Biden is likely to not be the candidate. I put it at about 65% for the Democrats. But if he would have fell flat in his face and did terrible at the State of the Union, I think that would have accelerated calls for his ouster by the Democrats. And I think if you're a Trump fan or you're a Republican, you want Joe Biden to be the nominee. So I don't know anyone else that had that take where I'm like, yeah, it was fine. I think Joe Biden, and there are people out there trying to make hay out of little things. Listen, if you've ever spoke for an hour and a half, basically uninterrupted, you're going to have a slip of the tongue, even if you're reading off a billboard. I do it on my show every day. I thought that, and I'm not a Biden fan or anything like that, but I felt that when he had slight gaffes, and they were very slight, that he was able to recover nicely. The only major one is the mispronouncing of Laken Riley's name, calling her Lincoln Riley. I don't think I'm as on that as some other people. I understand being rightfully pissed off of your Laken's family, of course. And I understand saying, yes, this is just pandering, of course, but I guess I'm numb to it because that's all of these politicians do. They pander anytime there's an individual tragedy. Now, it is true that there is blood on the hands of Democrats, not just because of the open border, but that's certainly part of it, but also because they've had intentionally weak on crime policies that have basically allowed violent criminals to roam the streets, and there will be predictable results of that. But, I mean, is this any different than any other average Democrat? He tried to say the name, whatever. We won't see a debate. Yeah, probably true. And I honestly thought that he, so that was my take, that I didn't think that other people, I gave the speech about a 4.5 out of 10, 4.5 out of 10. I thought it was a below average speech, both in the writing of the speech and in the delivery of the speech. I know, so I talked about all this last night so people could go see my live show. I'm not going to repeat it all, but I'll say this. It's been interesting to see people's take. A lot of people focused on the things I saw was the mispronunciation of Laken Riley's name. I'll leave other people talk about that. To me, didn't register as a standout moment. The fact that this was basically a political stump speech, certainly true. Now, I do think the likening Trump to Hitler and Putin at the beginning of the speech and basically setting this up as you have to vote for us to be for democracy is absurd. And I talked about that. But as far as this being a political speech, yeah, it might have been more overtly political, but that's the way things go. So, whatever. What's up, G-Unit? How's it going? On Kick. Nice to see you over there. Yeah, Lincoln Riley, head coach of OU, yeah. Biden's delivery is always stilted. He'll be like, listen, I'm going to tell you about this policy. Then we listen real close. And we're going to do this policy. And that's because our opponents are blah, blah. It's like he's got these two modes where he's pounding his fist, screaming in anger, or he does this whispering thing where it's like, now I'm telling you a secret. It's real serious. It's like very condescending. I just don't think he has a natural charisma as a speaker. He had more when he was younger, but it droned on. I got bored by the end of the speech, and I think that's just true. And I also didn't think the speech was written particularly well, in addition to the delivery not being that well. But I don't think it was a stinker of epic proportions or anything like that. I don't like the content of a lot what was said, the likening to it's a war for democracy and blah, blah, blah. But that's just my feelings on it. So, yeah, I agree, Bandit. There's always a question of, well, is what he's saying accurate? And that's not what I'm focused on. Of course I brought up, as the speech was going on, the idea that he's talking about the border when he told us for years the border was secure, and now he's saying, well, obviously it's not secure, and you need to pass our bill to do this. Do I think he wrote it? No, none of the presidents write their own speeches. They might have minimal input. I assure you Biden had less input than any of the presidents in my lifetime in writing this speech. But none of them write, even, Trump and Obama weren't writing their State of the Unions either. These are written by a committee. But yeah, I mean, it's the same old talking points. It's particularly from Democrats, blah, 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 racism, blah, 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 equal rights, blah, 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 voting laws are, blah, 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 tax the rich, blah, 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 spend money on a jillion different things, and we'll pay for it all by taxing the rich. The end. Softball Paul says, I heard him loud and clear, asshole. I'm an ugly motherfucker. Well, Your ears are great, fantastic. In your opinion, I'm not very attractive. Many others would share that opinion. I don't know that I have such high self-esteem of my own personal looks. But it seems like you're a man of intellect. How would you like to call in, Softball Paul? Looks like you really have some strong opinions, and no doubt, as someone who's a Biden supporter, you'll be able to crush some ugly motherfucker like myself quite easily in a debate of your choosing. Topic of your choosing, right? What's up, BOD? Right, Softball Paul? I mean, you seem like a really impressive, tough guy in the chat there. Surely you'd have no problem calling in and wrecking me, right? Funny. Of all the things that really go hard at me, I don't know if my looks yeah, I get it. I'm a fat, balding sack of shit. Sure. Got it. Yeah, I mean, I didn't even mention that Guess Who Farted. That's absolutely true. Talks about the need for new laws to pay income tax, etc., for the wealthy, and yet his own family is avoiding paying income tax. They're hiding. And by the way, this is true so often of people that advocate for new laws. Right, Barisma. Go ahead. That'd be a good topic. He won't call in. We know. You see the same with the gun control debate. They don't actually care. These laws and restrictions, they know that the people that are on their side will find loopholes or not pay. It's for their enemies and for the law-abiding people. So, for example, with gun control laws, I haven't seen the data recently, but I know, I think the last year I read was 2018. They're suggesting all these new laws to restrict your rights to getting firearms. And then when you look at the laws that are already on the books, such as felons that are attempting to purchase firearms, which is illegal, they're not allowed to do that. There's something like hundreds of thousands of instances of that a year. In 2018, I think there was 144,000 incidences of that, or something. May have even been higher. I don't remember the exact number, but it was in the hundreds of thousands. And the ATF decided to charge 4, not 4,000 or 400, 4. So those laws are already on the books. They choose not to enforce them, and then they say, we need new laws on the books, which again, they'll choose to selectively enforce only to the people they disagree. If it was a Trump supporter, they'd throw the book at him. But that's not who the majority of it is, so. Do I support abolishing income tax? Yes. Social Security, very hard, more difficult conversation. In theory, yes. Welfare, no. I do think there should be some limited forms of welfare. It should just be heavily, what's the word? You should have to prove the necessity for welfare in an emergency situation. If you choose not to try to alleviate that emergency situation, then you should be cut off. But welfare is such a broad, encompassing term. For example, should kids starve to death because they have deadbeat parents? Probably not. Aftershock always with these ridiculous questions. I don't have a concrete gun to my head abortion stance. I think there should be some limit to a first trimester abortion being okay, and then after that, you should be able to, whether that be 6 weeks, heartbeat, brain activity, I don't know. My gut would tell me 6 to 8 weeks. After 6 to 8 weeks, you should only be allowed to have an abortion in rare circumstance when the mother's life's in jeopardy, or the child would be born in extreme pain, or there are certain exceptions to tragic circumstances like rape, incest, and things like that, particularly with underage people that didn't have an ability to get to a doctor until a certain point. That's not much different than what I've said, and you've probably heard me say a dozen times, Aftershock, but that's my policy. Social Security, it's difficult. Now, I do think that it's something that we should probably seek to get rid of, but how can you tell people that are relying on it right now that they don't get it? That seems to be a difficult proposition. Maybe the way you do it is you grandfather it in. People of a certain age are entitled to it because they've worked their whole career planning on that money coming in every month. And then you tell people that are 40 or younger or something like that, hey, this isn't going to be available to you, and we'll refund the money that you've will try to figure out how much money you've paid into Social Security and refund it to you. But yeah, I would get rid of it after that. Where's the Paul guy? He didn't call in? Oh, jeez. Bummer. No, so student loan forgiveness is even worse. No. You can't be like, well, you don't get Social Security, but you get your student loans back. Okay, so then what would you do to someone who doesn't have student loans but's under the age of 40, Drugi? They just lose Social Security and get no benefit? No, sorry. Or they continue to get Social Security? I mean, at that point, no. There should be no special treatment whatsoever for students that comes off 1 cent of the taxpayer. No. That's different, right? Saying that we have to have a hard cutoff based on some sort of age to enact that sort of policy is one thing. Saying, no, we will still give any sort of beneficial treatment whatsoever. That means a person who's 22 who went to college and is probably making more money than a person who's 22 and didn't go to college, and that person who did go to college and is probably making more money is entitled to more benefits in some way from the government or more refunds or something like that comes in the form of taxation or inflation from the person who didn't go to school, therefore doesn't have the debt, is asinine. I don't care if it's 1 penny. Unacceptable. No. Free college, trade school, and all that stuff, retraining for anyone under 40. No. Also a terrible idea. Now we're talking about massively expanding the size of government in order to make up. So, and by the way, I'm glad you say this because this is oftentimes what the lefties or the socialists do. They'll say, what we need is more government, more spending, more influence by the government over certain areas. And then they get it. And then what happens, it causes unforeseen problems. And their answer is always, the answer to this problem that we caused is more government intervention. That's the answer. So let's have the government work more. For example, they're like, let's have the government intervene and we'll have lockdowns. Okay, we had lockdowns and that meant people were struggling financially. And they're like, aha, now we need the government to intervene and send everyone money. Okay, so we had the government intervene and send everyone money. Well, that caused one of the largest transfers of wealth from the poor and working class to the upper class in the history of the country, and it caused massive inflation. So what's their answer? Well, you heard Joe Biden last night. We need more programs, more spending for the people that lost out in this. And inevitably, that more spending will lead to more inflation, which will harm the poor and working class even more, which their answer won't be, oh, shit, maybe we should roll back. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the massive government spending and the lockdowns and the massive interventions on people's lives, maybe that's what's causing the problem. The answer will always be double down, do more, and then it'll cause the same problem. So in this situation that we're talking about, we're like, okay, we're talking about how to end Social Security, right? And the suggestion would be, we'll end Social Security for people under the age of 40, but those that got student loans will forgive their student loans. And I'm like, well, that screws over the people, because we had Social Security in the first place that led to this problem, right? Then because the government got involved in the student loan business in the first place, which led to the massive expansion, exponential increase in the cost of tuition as the value of an education continues to decline, but the price of it goes up and it's worth less and less every year. So the government already massively caused this problem. So now we say, well, now they'll forgive the student loans that they basically encourage people to take and led to people's poor. So now we'll give them, well, now that screws over the people that, one, not only have to pay the money because of the inflation and stuff like that, but now that didn't go to college, so they don't get a benefit from that. So now they got to pay for people who, in general, make more money than them. So my friends, for example, that graduated from a rural high school in New Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, now they got to pay more in taxes or more in inflation to bail out people that got student loans and are making considerably more money than them. And you're like, okay, but here's what we'll do. Now we'll spend even more money to have the government supplement education and things like that. Okay, then the problem with that is, the very first problem is that's going to cost way more money. Second, every time the government gets involved in education, it goes to shit and goes woke, as we could already see. That's what's happening with public education as we speak. Not only is it happening does it happen in preschool and is it happening in K through 12, but now we see it's increasingly happening when governments get involved in universities. Look at sort of Obama's memo that went out about Title IX saying that if you didn't take sexual assault allegations seriously, they were going to stop sending government money, which made schools believe any sexual assault accusation, particularly against straight men, which made them even more woke in return, right? Now we're going to say, well, here's what we'll do. We'll give free schooling that'll be just like that, and we'll give it to all these other people. Another problem would be is not everyone would accept that. Some people might say, I'm happy at my current job. I don't need more training. Sorry, you still have to bail out the people that are paying the student loans. So the whole thing is like, no. Instead of being like, well, we'll end Social Security, but then that means we have to give students money back. And then when you point out the unfairness of that, say, then we'll just keep throwing out free shit to people until everyone gets free shit. Oh, we're giving them free shit's not fair to this group. They didn't get free shit. Here's free shit for you. And then someone will say, but wait a minute, that free shit didn't include me. Okay, here's different free shit for you. It's absurd. Would I eliminate Social Security? Yeah, that's how we got in this conversation, Vita. I would eliminate Social Security. Probably what you have to do is have some sort of waning, right? So what you would have to do is you can't tell the people that are senior citizens now, depending on that, sorry, you don't have money, you're going to starve to death. They should be entitled to it. The people that have paid in, you have to have a certain cutoff at a certain age, 35, 40, 50, something like that. You have some sort of cutout. You try to pay back the money that people have paid into Social Security, so you give them that money, right? And then you tell people under a certain age bracket, like, that's it. There is no more paying into Social Security, but you're not going to get it once it comes. That's the best that you're probably going to be able to do. The problem is there's never going to be a great answer to this question, because once you give people benefits, you could vote socialism in, but you have to fight your way out. It's always that case. It is a losing argument. Who's ever going to win an election standing up and saying, hey, guess what? Someone's got to be left holding the bag. Someone has to. Like, for example, if you were just like, no, clean cut, end Social Security today, you would never win an election. Every person that gets Social Security right now would vehemently vote against you. Even if they were incredible fiscal conservatives, they'd say, screw that. I paid in. I'm entitled to this. It's the same with Obamacare. If you give people money from the government and then someone else runs and says, I'm going to take that money away from you, even if you could explain to them, look, you'll end up better in the long run, it doesn't matter. You're going to lose that election. And it's intuitive, even in ways that you would be like, for example, Republicans largely ran against the Democrats in the 2020 election. We're running on, if you vote for us, we'll send you more stimmies. We'll send them to you. Remember the runoff, the Senate runoff, right? And that was basically the argument in Georgia in the Senate runoff. Like the Georgia Senate Democrat senators were like, we'll send you free money. And people were like, shit, yeah. You can't explain to people like, well, that's not free money. Nothing's free. You're going to see massive inflation because of these sorts of policies. Whatever, man. We're going to see inflation anyways. Give me mine. I'll take my $1,500. It's the way it works. So it's difficult. And and that's just practically, would you have an ability to win an election? When you think of it morally, like it's a different calculus. Like when you take money from people in the form of taxation and then redistribute that money, it's almost always immoral. I'm not a complete libertarian. I believe there is a function for limited taxation and limited government programs. I think bare minimum programs, particularly to provide for people that are unable to provide for themselves, such as those that are very disabled, those that are children, I think those things are acceptable. I can accept, right? Maintaining of roads, maintaining of a military, maintaining of secure border, those sorts of things I understand taxation, but that's so little of where our money goes. So little, which is why we're taxed at ridiculous rates. Right, I'm libertarian adjacent. A libertarian would say all forms of taxation are criminal theft. You know, like I heard Penn from Penn and Teller say the way he looks at libertarianism is this. Anytime you tax someone and say we're going to redistribute it for a good cause, you should ask yourself, are you willing to hold a gun to someone and do that? Because that's what you're doing. Through government force, you are forcing people to give you their money and then giving it to people that you think are more deserving. Would you do that personally? Would you go up to a wealthy person and force them through violence to hand over some of their money so you could hand it to a homeless person? I wouldn't. But that's what taxation is, basically. The income tax is very unreasonable. I totally agree. A flat tax seems to be a more reasonable solution, but anyways, the current system we have is not sustainable. Despite what you hear Biden saying last night. Well, again, there are questions. One of the things you have to ask yourself is, who gives, Robin Hood is the villain, he says, right? Who gives yourself the ability to declare whether or not someone is innocent or guilty? I saw someone talking about this movie the other day, but there's a quote from this movie or play where the one character asks another, says, would you basically suspend due process to convict the devil? Like, and devil is a stand-in at this point, but like they literally mean the devil, like the worst, most immoral, evilest being to ever exist. Surely for that being, you would say, well, the rules don't apply, just throw him in jail, do whatever you can. And the protagonist is like, no, you can't do that. You can't. God, we're not God, right? And that's the problem. I might, like, people don't want to hear this, but like, there's a reason that vigilantism should be frowned upon. It doesn't mean that sometimes it doesn't happen and you might not even cheer it on, but a legal system has to punish that. Now, vigilantism's different than self-defense. The gentleman who was arrested on the subway, who was restraining a violent criminal that was trying to attack women, that's not him being a vigilante. You as a jurist might choose to forgive someone who's acted in vigilante way. Daniel Penny, that was his name. Right. But the legal system can't do that. Because, thank you, Gizmo. Because, again, and this becomes difficult. It seems like a difficult moral conundrum. But think of it this way. Well, if the legal system's corrupt, now you have different sort of questions. But who determines the corruption of it? I vehemently think our legal system's corrupt right now. Does that give me the legal or moral justification to go out and be a vigilante? I don't think so. I think at this point, I need to try to work within our system in a nonviolent way to encourage positive change in the system. Because as soon as I grant myself, the Judge Dredd, I'm judge, jury, and executioner, what if I'm wrong? Then what? Now what? And it goes back, it's so silly, right? But you can see how these concepts stem from certain things. I remember debating people vehemently, 2014, 2015, when there was a viral incident where Richard Spencer, who was a white nationalist at the time, he probably still is a white nationalist, but I don't think he calls himself that anymore. He gets punched in the face. And this conversation started, is it okay to punch a Nazi? And all these people were like, sure, yes. Okay. You have to ask yourself, before you look at the pragmatism of that, is that a moral position? I say no. It is not moral or morally justified to use physical violence against someone. Thank you so much for the sub, Aftershock. To use physical violence against someone based on their free speech. Now, if they come after you, if they are imminently going to physically attack you or your family, then that's self-defense. But you don't, if they are like, I think you should be kicked out of the country, and you punch them, you don't have the right to do that. Once they try to physically remove you, or they're imminent in physical removal of you, then it becomes a different calculus. That's self-defense. That should be the moral stance. But if I can't convince you morally, then let me convince you practically, and how this plays out in a practical application. Once you say, well, there are people so vile that I don't have a problem saying, sure, members of the public should just be allowed to punch them. You do understand what happens exactly. The very next step is they say, right, and you're a Nazi, so I can punch you. And I get called a Nazi all the time. I had someone on X just the other day tell me, because I was pointing out double standards in, I believe the specific issue was Joe Biden's mental incompetence being a reason to not charge him. Or maybe it was Burisma or something. Anyways, I was talking about the double standard and how FBI and intel agencies go after Trump as hard as possible, but not other people. And someone said something to the effect of, I should be locked up and I should lose my job working in the home healthcare field with people with autism because of how evil I am. I'll give you another example. Gonzalo Lira deserved to be locked up. Why? Because he was spreading Putin's talking points. He was in a country that's being invaded, and he was spreading Putin's talking points. And then, every time I talk... Thank you so much, Caps and Raids. I really appreciate it. Then, every time I debate someone on the left on Ukraine, what do they say? You're spreading Putin's talking points. So the very thing that they're saying, well, this dude should have been locked up because he was doing something really heinous. Oh, what was that heinous thing that deserves punishment or being locked up? Spreading Putin's talking points. And you might think, well, okay, well, Putin's a bad guy. I don't like Putin. Putin's a bad guy, so spreading his talking points, maybe that is reason to punish someone. And then they look at you and go, and by the way, you're spreading Putin's talking points. So what was that you said about punishing people that do that? Same thing. Exact same argument. I'm not eating people. And they justify this morally. And you could hear this in Biden's speech last night. They need to stop people voting for the candidate that they want to save democracy. But what is democracy? And again, I'm not big into semantic, I don't have a definition of democracy right in front of me. But the idea of democracy, the reason that we're saying it's important to protect is the idea of everybody gets a vote in how things go. That the country is a collective of people making a decision. Now, we have a republic. So the idea would be we have certain limitations on who gets a voice. Those are just, you have to be of a certain age. You have to be a citizen. But other than that, everybody has a voice. We all get an equal vote. And then whichever idea wins, wins. That's democracy. That's the idea, right? And what they're telling you is we can't leave that decision up to the people because that would be a threat to democracy. We have to prevent democracy to protect democracy. Should felons be able to vote? Probably. It depends. I think that one of the pet peeves I have about the legal system is there are certain crimes that I think that we should punish harsher. For example, crimes against children, things of that nature. But whatever our penalties are that we allow in the legal system, are the prescribed in the legal system, we should not have a society that then perpetually punishes people after they've served their time. That's how I feel. And you might not like that, but if someone, let's take a crime that maybe, isn't the most heinous, right? If someone burglarizes a convenience store and they get sentenced to jail for 5 years, does that mean they should never be allowed to vote again? Does that mean when they get out of prison, they should be treated as a forever pariah? Well, if so, I think it needs to be enshrined in the legal system that we say the punishment for this crime is up to 5 years in prison and a lifetime of XYZ. But I think, I'm not looking at it in what direction would they likely vote. So that's sort of how I look at it. Now, you may say, I understand the reasons that you would say no. What did Ogre say? Ogre says, I think it'd be worth questioning your stance on democracy because the very reason we're in this position in the first place is because of who we let vote and who we shouldn't. Well, that's a different question entirely. Me saying that their argument is we need to stop democracy to protect democracy is different than what my feelings on democracy is, right? I feel this way about, in a way, this is like weird, nuanced libertarian debates that you see. I see these occurring all the time. I love libertarians because everyone says that they have the correct interpretation of libertarianism and everyone else is wrong. It's sort of like communism, where they always say, no, that's not real communist. Except the communists you see are just complete brain-dead idiots. The libertarians, many of them are incredibly smart. I just feel that they're advocating for sort of a utopian system that will never come into fruition and denies human reality most of the time, right? But I enjoy watching their nuanced debates, and what my feelings are in sort of the libertarian camp that would say, look, the government shouldn't be involved in XYZ, but if it is, this is how things have to be. And that's sort of where I get my stance on gay marriage. Like, I don't think the government should be involved in the institution of marriage at all. In fact, I've been thinking about this a lot. I've slightly adjusted my position on marriage, on gay marriage, because I saw a debate with Barack Obama and the guy he was running against in like 2004, and the guy he was running against had a really interesting take about how the reason for the institution of marriage has to do with the government incentivizing procreation, which is good, and they should incentivize nuclear families. Mom, a dad, children. That's absolutely good to incentivize that. But he focused primarily on the having children part. And so the reason, and the host of the show is trying to get him, oh, so then if you're a male and you have a vasectomy, or you've had a tragic accident, or you're a woman and you can't get pregnant, then you shouldn't be allowed to get married. And he says, no, because you have the possibility, right? The generality of the possibility. Childbirth requires a man and woman. That is the general principle. There are specific people within that might not be able to have children, but they shouldn't be punished because of that. But the general stance should be. And I don't disagree with that, except to say this. Then if the point is to incentivize childbirth, then incentivize childbirth. Two-parent homes that have a child. Now, gays can be upset all they want, but that's not going to work for them. And you could limit it and say, no, adoption could count, but like we won't, surrogacy and stuff we don't count. Okay. The point made in the debate is based on faulty premise that sexual attraction is a choice. Well, it is. There's solid evidence that it's both. I don't think the debate's out that you're born gay. There might be some people that are, but no doubt not everyone who identifies as gay or is physically attracted was born that way. Some of it could be socially ingrained behavior, which is why I think we're seeing those numbers increase of people that are identifying as LGBT. Nonetheless, the institution of marriage, I don't think the government should be involved in it. They don't have to call it, they could call it marriage, and if they do, I don't see how you could discriminate against two consenting adults. I just don't. And the argument against that is, well, why can you discriminate against three consenting adults? Well, because it is a financial arrangement, and the government's giving benefits based on this financial arrangement, and that arrangement entails two people. Right, that's my point. Do I give a shit if the government thinks me and my wife's married? Well, for tax reasons and for a bunch of legal reasons, yes. But no, in general, as far as like, do I feel that the government's got some authority over me and my wife's relationship? No, fuck them. God does. That's who I care about, sanctifying my marriage. And so if my friend, who I have friends that are gay, if my friend who's gay wants to get married, I don't think the government should have any say in it. I don't. But if the government is going to have say in it, I don't think the government should be allowed to discriminate against them. But that doesn't mean that the marriage is sanctified in God's eyes, which is all that really matters to me. And I don't understand the argument that people are like, well, then let them have the same government benefits, but don't call it marriage. That you can't do that. Like, I'm not interested in that sort of semantical type argument. If you don't feel they're married, that's perfectly acceptable. That's fine by me. You could say, I don't believe in your marriage. I don't think you should be allowed to, well, I don't want to say allowed to. I don't think you should treat them like garbage because of it. You're not allowed in my place of business because of that. I don't know about that. Though there's probably an argument that you should be allowed to refuse service for any reason. But nonetheless, I digress. But I think we should, as a government, because of the shitty decisions of the government, heavily be incentivizing two-parent households that are procreating. I don't think the incentive structure, which is set up now to encourage single-parent households, is good at all. I think it's garbage. But I think you could do that outside the scope of marriage. For example, I mean, I'm sorry, if your issue, and I would love to talk to the people at the Crucible about this, because I know I've talked to Andrew Wilson fleetingly about the need to increase child production, right? If you're a person who believes that, that's really interested in declining birth rates and you want to reverse that trend. And part of that, now the best argument is, and I concede this, and I've told Andrew this in private and publicly, the best argument is not providing some sort of financial incentive, but cultural shifts towards the importance of families. And the best shift there is towards that importance is probably religion and Christianity. But I don't care if you get there through Islam or atheism or Judaism. I don't care. I don't think it should be government mandated. But we're not talking about government policy. We're talking about culturally. What should we be encouraging? We should be encouraging young people to get married and have families. That's what we should be encouraging. That's absolutely what we should be encouraging. So the question then becomes, if the institution of marriage is the government's legalese definition of marriage and the purpose of the government giving in tax incentives and special privileges to married couples, should you be entitled to those privileges if you're not having children? For example, let's say that the government gives some sort of new program. It's like, hey, if you get married, you get $10,000. And the idea behind this program is we want to encourage childbirth. And so then all of a sudden we see a rash of young people get married, but none of them are having kids. Is that a good policy? And let's say they get married just for the $10,000, but they're still going out every weekend on Tinder and just hooking up. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, on paper we'll be married and then we'll do whatever the hell we want. Does that solve the problem? I don't think so. That's right, Cottonmouth. The direct response would be, instead of a policy giving financial aid to the married, it would give financial aid and assistance to those that have children and remain together as a couple. Yeah, and that's fine, Sunflower. And again, I don't really give a shit about this, but the semantic argument is like civil union versus marriage. But if the incentives are to encourage childbirth and nuclear families raising children in two-parent households, then that's where the incentive should be. Not just, oh, we got married. Thank you, Cottonmouth, for the follow. I appreciate it. In my opinion. But anyways, I get on this question because it's the idea of oftentimes there are the way things would be if we had total control. So like I don't want to say utopia, the civilization we each have in our mind. How would we like to see civilization? For example, let me just give you a non-legal. I would love to live in a society where no one has to lock doors. Wouldn't that be great? No locked doors needed. But that's not human nature. You will never get rid of evil. You will never get rid of people committing crime. You won't. And you can't then govern and say, well, we'll set the law that says no locked doors because it'll lead to tragedy. Obviously. So it's like that on a litany of other issues. You could say, I wish this is the way things were, but oftentimes the nature of humanity and the nature of the real world doesn't allow things to be that way, even if that's how you want. Like, I want to live in a world where if I see someone hitchhiking, a single woman can pick that hitchhiker up and there is no threat that anything negative will happen. That's not the world we live in. I want to live in a world, and again, it's weird to me. I'm a little bit of a burly guy. I think I'm weak. I need to work out more. But I don't know that necessarily I'm, particularly in my small town, a target if I'm walking at night. Small college I went to. I remember when I turned 21, I was on the debate team and I was basically just hanging out with people on the debate team. And I had a lot of friends in the art department. A lot of girls, probably 2-to-1 girls. And so I would go out to the bar with them, and I wasn't dating any of them or anything like that. I wasn't the type, when I was drinking, I was not the type of person that was looking to like hook up with a chick or anything. I was there to have fun, had a ton of friends that were girls. And I remember the one time a couple of the girls were like, can you walk us home? And I was like, why? What? We're at this little state school, Clarion University. I'm like, what are you worried about? You live like 6 blocks away. And they're like, oh yeah, you like, It's 1 a.m. You don't want to be a girl walking alone in a dark alley, even in a small town like this. And I thought it was ridiculous. And then like 3 weeks later, there was a girl that was assaulted in a back alley. She wasn't leaving the bar. She was leaving a party. And it never crossed my mind because I didn't see myself as, would I like a society? In my head, that was, yeah, shit, walk home, no big deal. But that's not the way we live. So for a lot of this stuff, like, well, what if we just got rid of Social Security? Like, it's not going to happen. And for it to happen, because we're already in a bad situation, there's no correct way to just snap your fingers and get rid of it. By the way, this is another problem that the libertarians have. When you really, really go deep in the weeds with them, right? Like, you have interesting questions of, like, who's entitled to which properties? Like, let's say the government fraudulently, in the eyes of me, I think the government is acting not me, but say I'm an anarcho-capitalist, and I think the government acted fraudulently in the fact that they took land from my grandfather, and they took that land away from him. So they took it, and then they sold it to another family who paid money for it, and they've raised that land in a good way and did nothing immoral or wrong. Now we say, no, we have to right that wrong. The government should be dissolved. Now who's entitled to that land? There's no good answer. You know, and I remember talking to Fabian Liberty once about this, and like, it was like, he was like the original landowners, the descendants of the original landowners. Well, then how do you view someone like Native American tribes that maybe settled land but didn't declare ownership over it? Do their ancestors get that land? Or because they didn't drive a stake in the ground and say, this is my land, they just said, well, it's communally our land, but we're not driving stakes. Because that seems to reward people that did things in a way that the government said they had to do them to require land ownership. I'm not going to give the whole homesteading lecture. But that's the problem. It's convenient to say, no, they don't count. The Indians don't count. That seems convenient to me. But you can't blame them, because once the ball starts rolling and the government intervention creates a problem, it's almost impossible. So the ideas of like, look, government, you know, the argument I saw Dave Smith having the other day with libertarians was like, libertarians are like, public schooling shouldn't exist. The government has no right to be involved in education. Okay, and Dave Smith's argument's like, okay, I agree with that. And they're like, and if there are vagrants in public schools, drug users, whatever, the government shouldn't have the right to use police to kick those people out. That's force. And Dave Smith, who calls himself a libertarian, is like, I disagree. And they're like, but that's not libertarian, because now you're using government force. And Dave Smith's argument's like, listen though, I don't believe that the public schools should exist, but they do. And so now operating in that world, if it was up to me and I could snap my fingers, they wouldn't exist, then the problem goes away. But to the extent that they do exist and I can't snap my fingers, then I don't think drug-using adults should be allowed to sit in second-grade classrooms and disrupt the class. And many of the libertarians are like, no, that's a use of government force to have police remove them. And I agree with Dave Smith more there. Where I'm like, well, no, there are a lot of things that I don't think the government should be involved with. But once they are, then we have to minimize damage as best as possible. So, for example, I think we should completely end the asylum system in this country. Completely end it. That's my belief. That's what we should do. We absolutely should. That's tragic for people that are really seeking asylum. But because people have used that loophole in bad faith, not just the people coming that are all now claiming asylum, but people in our institutions, such as Democrats, a lot of establishment Republicans, et cetera, that have exploited that system to have massive demographic and voting changes in this country, we now have to say, sorry, you can't prey on our goodwill anymore. And that does mean that there will be a handful of asylum seekers that legitimately me and you might want to help out that we have to turn away. But that's the best we could do because of the terrible situation we're in. But that's not going to happen. They're not going to end asylum. So there are individual policies I could cheer for that don't end asylum that are incrementally better. For example, then we should have remain in Mexico. We should not allow the people in that are seeking asylum That's what we should do. Yeah, we should lock down the border. All right, where's all the lefties at? Someone calling. I was going to do a space. Let me see if I can do this. Let me see if I can set up a space. Well, I don't even know if it's possible. Let's try to do it. We'll see if we can chum some people in on a spaces. Do I remember how to do this? We'll try to set up a space here and see. First, I guess we'll see if anyone's on Discord I can monkey with. Oh, let's see. Nope. Just me. All right. We'll try to get this space set up, maybe. What's this thing doing? Loading? I don't know. All right. Let's see. Create spaces. What should I title my space, everyone? I'm trying to chum in. Right wing. Calling out lefties for debate. How's that sound? We'll try it. Or how about calling out Democrats? It would help if I could spell. Record the space. Yes, let's do it. All right, we'll see if I get this running. Now, one thing is, for some reason, what happens is my volume tends to go down on my end when I do this. Why does it have to be a lefty? No, it doesn't have to be a lefty, I guess. The problem is, what I'm looking for is someone to disagree with me on something. And if I don't put Democrat or lefty, what I'll get is people calling in going, I agree, man, you're the smartest person I've ever heard. Right, got no, obviously not that, but you see the point. I would rather argue with someone who vehemently disagrees with me this evening than someone who's going to be like, well, I have this little nuanced difference with you. But I'm fine with that, too, I guess. Anyway, so then we'll do it through the space and not through Discord. So let me end my Discord here. Yep, yep. Okay. Here's the link to the space, maybe, if I can get it up. How do I share? This button. Copy link. That should have been the title. Biden takes the L, State of the Union. I should have did change my mind. Biden's State of the Union sucked. State of confusion. See, I should have chummed him in. I'm not good at that sort of stuff. But anyways, there's the space. My mic's off right now. I will do a little introduction when we finally chum someone in, if we do. But nice to see on X right now. I got 73 people watching me. I don't know if is that a legitimate number or am I being botted? I hope I'm not being botted. If you're watching on X, give me a hi or a thumbs up or something like that. I'd really appreciate it. You don't even have to say a word. Now I'll have 2 streams on X. I will have this stream that you're listening to and then the spaces. Will I still be on in an hour? I'll be looking to end around there, but you can try. I'll probably still be here. On X, it does cumulative views, so it never goes down. Is that true? Oh. Aftershocks on X. All right. Yeah, the communist control of Twitch. All right, there's Mix-a-Lot. All right, give me a second. I'm gonna just because this is being recorded on the space, so I'm gonna do this. Hey, how's it going, everyone? It's robnoerr here on X. trying to do a spaces calling out some Democrats that possibly would want to debate me on any topic of their choice, whether it be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, specific policy positions, double standards in law enforcement, anything that they would want to talk about. Now, I'm also live streaming simultaneously to some other platforms that I'm on. So I just wanted to give an introduction to all of the people that are watching here on X on the space, and then the people that might be watching. So I'm going to continue about my show as if I was doing a normal show. But I wanted to give an easy opportunity for people that disagree with me to go ahead and come on. And I think it's far easier on a platform like X and on Spaces for people, even from the convenience of their own phone, to be able to just quickly join, say what they need to say, rather than maybe going through the arduous process of getting on a computer or something and going through Discord. And I know a lot of people that are watching me are like, what are you talking about, old timer? It's not difficult to use Discord. Right, for you youngsters. But for us old timers, what can you do? Now, how is my volume? Yeah, it looks good. Looks good. Dirty Bird Distiller says, debate. Boobs or butt? I'm married. That's my answer. I like my wife. So we will take, now obviously I prefer to have people I disagree with, but we will take people that maybe do agree with me and just want to talk about some issues, have a question for me or anything like that. That would be fine. So if you do want to join, I'll put the link so you all can see. Feel free to join. It'd be easy for you to then go ahead and chat if you like on that space. Just let me know. I see we got Mix-a-Lot and Valiant Bangle already in here. All you have to do is request permission to talk, and we'll get you in there. I'm going to take a drink of some tasty water here. Now, one of the things is I was doing the spaces a lot. It's one of the things that's convenient is if I got an hour off at work, I could do a space, just use my phone. Unfortunately, when I do them through my phone, I sound like I have a terrible lisp, and I can't figure out why. And I already have an annoying enough voice, so I don't know if I need a lisp on top of that. That might not be the best thing for me. But, you know. What do I think of the new head of the RNC? I got to be honest, I saw that the new head was picked. I know very little about him. I know that, is it Trump's daughter's like the co-chair? We'll see. I would have preferred to see someone like Scott Pressler is who I would have liked to have seen. So it's a name that I'm not familiar with, and I'll have to look into exactly what their proposed plans are. But, you know, I don't think it could be any worse than Ronna McDaniel, who was, as far as I'm concerned, a person at the head of the RNC who was operating with the intentions of sabotaging people in the RNC that the establishment didn't like. And so getting rid of her is a plus. Now, is she replaced by someone who's going to do the exact same thing? Maybe. Is the person competent? I don't know. We'll have to see. But I don't think getting rid of Ronna McDaniel is a bad thing. I guess things could always get worse, but you'd be hard-pressed to find someone that was worse than her. So I am starting to believe, by the way, thank you so much. Special shout-out to Imaginarium on YouTube for telling me that the X viewers on my restream, it says I'm currently streaming to 76 people on X. I don't know that that's true. I think that might be cumulative views, not current views. Now, I never noticed that. That never was that way until yesterday. I thought I was killing it. I thought I was killing it on X. So thank you for telling the truth, Imaginarium, but also ruining my night. But it's still appreciate the truth. The truth is important. Thoughts on who should replace Mitch? Rand Paul. It won't be him. It'll be Cornyn or Thune. It'll both be terrible. The establishment Republicans will not let go of the power. That's where the money is within the party, and that's where the power is going to be. They're not going to give that up. So, yeah, I wish it were not the case, but yeah, Rand Paul should be. Now, maybe after years, we'll start to get people in positions of leadership in the Republican Party that aren't total trash. We could hope. Nigel Perry says, Who are you saying? The new RNC chair called people a slur for is that a slur for Hispanic people? Is that what you're saying? Obviously it's not something I can repeat on stream. But is that what you're saying, Nigel? That Jon Stewart covered it? Oh, McBacon Love's going to go find a lefty online for me. See, now I'm up to 81. It says I'm streaming to 81 people on X. I'm killing it. Not really, but that's okay. Wow, I was so pumped last night. I was like, what was it? Yeah, I don't give a shit anymore. I'm sorry. With all the daily... Do I like racist of any stripe? I do not. With all the hatred of the white hatred that's out there, I just saw MSNBC had people on there talking about rural white people. I don't give a shit anymore. I will no longer be shamed. I just don't care. I don't give a shit at all. I don't know what the context was of him saying this. I don't care that if he used the word. If he's really a racist, I despise that. I'm tired of that cudgel being used. The left doesn't give a shit about what they say. Their hypocrisy proves that they don't care and they know you do. And I'm tired of playing that game. Oh boy, we're going to police and make sure our side never says anything that could be offensive or deemed as a racist joke or racist in any way to the other side. Meanwhile, while they openly tell us that they hate white people and Christians and straight men, fuck them. Don't care. Yeah, I did see that Katie Britt response. It was absolutely horrendous. Absolutely horrendous, the Republican response. That's what I mean, Nigel. So did they know it was a slur? Like, I hesitate to even do it because if I say the word and then admit that I know it's a slur, I guess theoretically that would violate terms of service. But there is a word that I grew up hearing a lot that I thought meant getting screwed over out of money. And it turns out it is a slur for people that are gypsies. So I won't say the term, but I've never met a gypsy in my life, had no negative connotations other than maybe seeing the movie Snatch, which I thought the gypsies were really cool in that movie. But I had no frame or context to be involved with people of that persuasion that I had animosity towards, that I would use a slur to offend them. But of course I used that word one time and someone jumped down my throat as how offensive it was and it was a racial slur and this, that, and the other. It's not something... My policy on things is jokes are jokes. I'm not the type of person that's throwing N-words around a lot in jokes or anything like that. I'm not going to say I've never used the term. I'm not racist. I don't dislike black people. I don't dislike anyone for their race. I don't. I think that we are too humorless in this society. Having said that, if I say, and again, I'm not saying this as someone that throws around racial epithets or anything. I don't. I have in the past in the context of jokes, but not very significantly, not much at all in my life. I don't give a shit in the sense that I try to be someone that's respectful of other people and respectful of certain situations. There's terms of service. I understand they're enforced on the platforms that I'm on. I don't talk like that in my real life almost any whatsoever. I certainly try to abide by the terms of service here. If I say things that I didn't even know were offensive and someone asks me in a polite way to not do that, depends on the situation, but more often than not, I would say, okay, if you're in good faith asking me, to not use a certain term, and I'll give you an example. One term I do not use, I'll use it here because you might be confused. But because I work with people with autism and developmental disabilities, I have tried to completely take the term retard out of my vocabulary because I personally know people that have been called that word and it negatively affected them in a significant way. So I've chosen out of respect for them to take that word out of my vocabulary. Do I think you're a terrible person if you use that term? No, not at all. It's all in your intent behind certain things. If you go up to a person that's autistic and you keep calling them that name in an attempt to hurt them, then fuck you, you're a horrible person. But if you're that's a word that you use in your everyday life, And then if someone who was autistic came to you and you said that and felt bad because they were upset and you're like, I'm so sorry. No, I don't think you're a terrible person. Do I realize that people can hide behind the joke as an excuse to get away with being racist? Sure. So what do? Assume everyone who uses a term is racist? I don't give a shit. I just don't. Yeah, I know that's what they do, Roland. They start, so many times what happens is they start under the assumption, does your worldview or your politics or whatever align with mine? If so, you're a good person, and I always give you the benefit of the doubt. If not, you're an evil person, and I always assume that you have evil intent. So that's, for example, there's phrases that we don't even traditionally consider offensive, like make America great again. Well, the left says that's racism. What? Oh, that's hearkening back to the days of white supremacy when blacks were enslaved. That's what they mean by make America great again. Well, Bill Clinton had that as one of his slogans. Was that racist? No, because Bill Clinton's a good guy. See? We're told that the OK symbol, that's white supremacy. What? But I could show you video after video or image after image of a bunch of Democrats that have done that. Well, that's different. They didn't mean it as white supremacists. What does racism look like to me? Have I ever seen it or heard it? How do you decipher it? Because you notice when people are racist against white people. Sure, I've seen racism. Absolutely. I used to deal with it quite frequently as a bartender. I bartended in a really poor rural white town. Think of the type of person in a town like this that would be frequenting a bar at, say, 1 p.m. And I would see people come in and they would be like, I hate these N-words. And man, they get everything in life. And, they're terrible people and they're not productive or anything. And I'd be like, really? Yeah, they don't even have jobs. I'd be like, oh, cool. And by the way, where are you working now? Well, I'm not working. Oh, you're not? What are you producing to society? You're shit-faced at a local bar at 1 p.m? But go on. Well, they're criminals. Yeah, didn't you just get out of jail? So yeah, I've dealt with racists, of course. Someone say, you tell me, what's more racist? Someone dropping the N-word in the context of a joke who hasn't showed you through any actions in their life short of the way they talk, any animosity to people of a certain skin color? So maybe they have black friends and they're a landlord and they rent to black people and they, were the best man in their friend's wedding who happens to be a black guy. But you heard them one time use the N-word in a joke at the bar. Or a person who doesn't use language like that, who doesn't use slurs, but tells you, I think white people are a huge problem. They're evil. They're responsible for all this stuff. They're colonizers. Who's more racist? A lot of what goes on, actually, this is something that I've thought about a lot. A lot of the problems with racist jokes or the jokes that Trump says or what it really is it's a class bifurcation. Like, let me give you an example and take race out of it for a minute. Trump's grab him by the P word comment, right? Now that may have shocked you to hear a guy who thought he was off camera talking to another guy as he's golfing. By the way, he didn't admit to sexually assaulting people. He said they let him. Because he's basically saying, hey, man, when you're a wealthy, powerful dude, man, women are throwing themselves at you. That may have shocked you. But if you're from my world, literally 99% of the women I know talk dirtier than that on a regular basis. Because I'm from poor people. That's how we talk. And you might say, well, that's because you're weird hillbilly people. You're in the hills of Appalachia. You're in Pennsylvania. That's not how poor people talk everywhere. Okay, go to the inner city. Go see how black people in the inner city talk. You let me know. Or you could just get a reasonable facsimile of how they talk by putting on your favorite NWA or Body Count album. How do they talk about women? How do they talk about everyday situations? You might not like it. You might say, well, there's a time and a place for that. You shouldn't be talking about that at the business meeting. I totally agree, obviously. But when you're talking to your friends in sort of a social situation, that's how people talk. In my world, one of the problems is I feel so bad for people that check a lot of minority boxes that just want to be treated like regular people. Like, imagine, let me see. Yeah, Nigel Berry says, as a mixed person, I have plenty of friends drop the N-word, but not in a demeaning way because we're homies. You just know what you're talking to. Right, and it's not a perfect solution because you don't know everyone's intent. You basically just make a gut check on your own whether or not you find that person to be racist or not. But even if they're not using a racial slur, you might do that. And I know that's not a great answer, but I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt until I have reason not to. That's how I look at it. I know that might not be the same for everyone, but that's how I try to look at things. What was I going to say? So there's a lot of this is rooted in classism. It's like, let me put it in a way that maybe that people could understand. Like, it's like how a low economic person that wants to rob people is probably going to do it in a very ham-fisted way. You know, pull a weapon out and take money from someone in person. But a CEO from a very wealthy place, they may rob people far more successfully, but it's done in a way that there's like plausible deniability and it uses a bunch of legalese. Now, arguably, their crime's worse. They've taken a greater amount of money from a greater amount of people. You might say, yeah, but they didn't traumatize people by threatening physical violence. And there's an argument to be had there, right? But it's like we say, well, people could get away with certain behaviors that we as an average person would say we find to be disgusting behaviors, like being racist. But you can get away with it if you do it in a way that's sophisticated. And what we really have a problem with is crude language. That's what we're really upset about. The crude joke. You know, I happen to like a lot of comedians that I think are very offensive. One of the comedians that I like, even though if I don't share his politics, is Doug Stanhope. You know, and Doug Stanhope has a joke. It's hard to talk about because of terms of service here. But he has a joke where he's talking about a slur for gay people. And it is one syllable. And he says he really likes that word. And so he's going to use it. But if you're gay and you have a problem with it, he'll hook up with you afterwards behind the stage. He won't like it, but... And it's his way of saying, like, it's not... Right? Like, it's just a way of talking. It's not meant to be offensive to the people in that particular group. Yeah, and, you know, and it's a weird thing. Like, I find it funny. One of the ways I try to fight racism is I think a lot of the way in rural Pennsylvania, in communities that are, you know, drugs are a huge problem in my community. And I don't mean like people smoking weed. I mean like painkillers. I'm talking like opioids. It's a real problem. Really a real problem. Depending on what little town you're in, worse in some areas than others. And the irony to me is when I'm looking at things from a broad perspective, I see more in connection with these people that I live with and people that are struggling in the inner city that happen to be black or happen to be Hispanic or whatever. I see a lot more in common than different. At least when it comes to treatment by the people that we put in positions of authority. Congrats, Laura Trump, on the RNC chair. Co-chair. No comment, Drinky Poo. You know, so I try my best to, but I'm not going to say I haven't seen racism. I have. I've seen people that I like that it's clear that they're racist. And I'm like, ooh, didn't know that. I didn't completely disassociate from them. I could honestly say that in my small town, because of the nature of there's predominantly white people here, I haven't met a lot of racists, probably a handful. Particularly younger people, I haven't seen a lot of racists at all. But those people that I would have seen would certainly have been racist to people of color. But in my time as a debater in the debate community with the radical left, I saw far more open racist. Ironically, much of it racist towards people of color without them even realizing it. By infantilizing them and taking agents. They can't help it. The person of color can't help. That, too, is a form of racism. A bigotry of low expectations. That's what I'm saying, Roland. Those racists, far and away, are more racist to Asians, white people, etc. Do I support government intervention and tax dollars going to help addicts? No. I don't know. I'd really have to think about it. I don't want to fall in the trap and being like, it's such a small drop in the bucket compared to the massive spending we have. It seems like something that would be far more worth it than, say, sending money to Ukraine. But if you're going to legalize drugs and then say, oh, but if you screw up with them, we'll give you all this aid. I mean, it seems to be providing an incentive structure for an incredibly bad system that will get overdrawn. I was an alcoholic myself. How much money, tax dollars, should you all have had to spend on me? I think it's one of those things where the private sector could help way more. Alcoholics coming together. People privately spending money and helping. But I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world. I don't think jail helps addicts at all. I think we should focus on jail. I think jail should be punitive, particularly for the most heinous of crimes. But it should be somewhat punitive for all crimes. But it should also attempt to be rehabilitative. One of the things I think is the most frustrating in this country is how disgusting our jail system is. I find it to be again, I don't mind offensive jokes. I've already said that. So if you tell a joke that is centered around the theme of rape, I'm not going to be like, you're a horrible person. It's not the joke that upsets me. It is that the reality of prison is such that rape is so frequent that we're able to joke about it, is what upsets me. Particularly when you consider that, although it is true, and again, I'm not Key Lime, who doesn't believe prison should exist. I'm not that person. I definitely think that prison should exist, and it should be punitive in nature to a point. It should be punishment. Absolutely. But it should not be cruel punishment to the point of absurdity where people were being sexually assaulted on a regular basis. Right? I don't believe that. Right? But I also think that we should be trying to make people productive members of society within reason while they're in prison. Key Lime says, what's the alternative? Otherwise, it feels like we might just leave them out to die. Well, what should we do? How effective are these programs? So we see this, right? What do you do when the program's designed, your tax dollars go to programs that are designed to help addicts that make it worse? So, for example, they help addicts in San Francisco. How's that going? Open air drug markets. So at some point you have to say, well, then what's the idea here? Do you forcibly detain them? Should they be, I know the code for psychiatric detainment's a 302. Should we 302 people? You're forcibly hospitalized against your will until you're clean? Do I think psychiatric hospitals should be government subsidized or privatized? It's difficult. I think there probably should be government money to go into people with psychiatric problems. I do agree with that, particularly with conditions that parents don't know how to deal with, such as autism. We're learning much more, but understand, in my job, I deal with people that are adults that had developmental disabilities. And the tragedy is oftentimes when these adults were young people and they started to manifest signs of significant autism or other disorders, they didn't know how to deal with them. It was just kind of, and then because they didn't know how to deal with them and they just treated them like any other kid, inevitably problems arise. And then instead of saying, oh, well, this is a problem because the kid has autism. They're like, well, he's just antisocial. He can't be in a social setting. And then ends up what happens is, those people end up usually being involved in the medical or the legal system and would be sent to psychiatric hospitals. So the idea of trying to provide some sort of, again, private is always better, but some sort of government funds, because I think the cost of not treating those people is different. But that's different than addiction, because even though addiction isn't a choice, it is a choice. It's something that you decided to do at some point, right? There should be help offered to you, and I hope that private help's offered, and maybe there could be some form of government assistance, but where do we draw the line? It's the same with asylum, right? If I were to tell you, if you were king, right, and you had laws, but as king, you could choose to ignore the law in specific circumstances. So, for example, let's say it said stealing is punishable by 3 months in jail. And then you literally run across the stereotypical decision of a single mother stealing a loaf of bread to feed her family. That's legitimately what happened. You as king could say, okay, in this one instance, no, we will not jail this woman. You could waive the law in that point. If you were that type of king and you said, we're done taking asylum seekers, but then some person washes up to the shores of Florida, and they were on a boat for Cuba and they were being tortured, and they jumped off the boat and swam 5 miles to the shore of Florida, and now they're exhausted and dying. Should that person be allowed to stay? Probably. You'd probably say, okay, I know because of the mass flux of illegal immigration that we had and everyone taking advantage of the asylum system, we said no more. But this one person in this unique situation will allow, right? You'd probably do that. The problem is that's not the way things work, because as soon as you give the exemption once in our current system, then that exemption is exploited over and over and over and over. Not by people that are saying, oh, each of these situations is that unique situation, and so therefore we need to do this. It's because they have a different agenda. They want to flood the country with people that they know are economic migrants that aren't seeking asylum. And so you have to just say, I'm sorry, no. I'm sorry, no. Can't do it. The same is true of these questions of providing aid. Well, we see when this is done, what happens? Oh, well, let's give clean needles and things like that. Then we have open air drug markets, people doing drugs right in front of children. We have criminal recidivism over and over and over and over again. People taking advantage of the programs. Untold amounts of dollars being spent. While people that aren't making bad choices but have came across hard times are struggling more. So maybe you lose your job. You're a single father, a single mother. You lose your job through no fault of your own. It gets outsourced to Mexico because of terrible policies that we have by the people that are governing. Or your business got locked down under COVID and you lost it, and now you're struggling with your family. That person, you could say, I could see how through no fault of their own, they're now in this terrible situation and they need temporary assistance. But they're really working hard to try to no longer need that assistance. Versus the person that you've given Narcan 17 times to, that's continuing to shoot up in front of children. So at what point do we say, look, once we say, yeah, you're right, we have to have government assistance for addicts, what happens is then it becomes $1 trillion industry. At the end result of it. Keep giving more. Got to give more. Oh, look, we're causing more problems. For example, one of the things they did in California, I think it was in San Francisco, they decided they're going to give a bunch of people, homeless people and drug addicts, free apartments. What happened? Well, they ended up ODing at much higher rates, taking much more drugs. Oh boy, economic assistance in certain ways? Great. Now I don't have to worry about it. I could use that for drugs. We spend so much money on these policies in places like California, and it literally has the exact opposite effect. Now, am I saying that we shouldn't provide money for Narcan for police officers? No, I'm not saying that. That technically is government assistance. Your tax dollars to go to pay for something to help an addict. That's probably something that we should have. So should we have limited policies and things of that nature? Sure. I think, Pentuple, you're not talking to me, because I think I would agree with you ultimately that prison should serve the purpose of punitive punishment and rehabilitation. There should absolutely be an aspect of punishment. Yeah, well, there's another problem. Disabled veteran. Yeah, I figured it out, Pentuple. No worries. Did anybody hop on? Mix-a-Lot, Valiant, Warren. If anyone wants to speak, just let me know. That's on the space there. Now, I will admit, I wouldn't have started this space if I didn't think there were 90 people watching me right now on Twitter. I didn't know that that was a cumulative number and not the live people watching right now. So starting the space was a little premature there, but that's okay. I thought maybe Elon threw me a bone and all of a sudden I had people paying attention to me, which they should be. But no, a different topic. Happy to talk about stuff like that. I'll take some other topics here. One thing I wanted to add, it appears I'll be streaming a little early on Wednesday on a panel, yay, that Wick is hosting. And I don't know exactly what the topic is. Something to the effect of, has Trump been good for the Republican Party? And I will be on that debate panel. The people, I'll tell you the list of the people on that panel. 1 second. Most of them I don't know. I think. I don't know, maybe I do and I just don't remember. We have Hutch, Lauren De Laguna, who I've heard of both of them, Pondering, that I just debated the other week. He'll be there. Rashad Crenshaw, me, and Admiral Gibbs. Hutch, I think Hutch is a bigger streamer. I don't know. Lefty, I think. There's my wife joining in. I'm charging my phone, wife. Wow. Yeah, I was bragging to Courtney last night. It's like, hey, Courtney, I actually had like 100-something people watching me on Twitter. Isn't that awesome? And now she could laugh at me when it turns out it was just 2 people that kept refreshing. Well. What's up, Rolo Ed? Thank you so much for the follow. I really appreciate it. Roll of the Dead. I screwed that up. Should be a good panel. Yeah. De Laguna. I think I've heard a little about her. Scott Horton versus Bill Kristol. Yeah, I bet he got slaughtered. He's not. It was just my wife watching me over and over. Yeah, Jordan. So I don't know. The way Wick set this up, he was like, I need pro-Trump people and anti-Trump people. But am I pro-Trump on this topic? It's a difficult question. How do you define what's good for the Republican Party? Who defines what the Republican Party is? For example, if the Republican Party is the establishment, people that have traditionally ran the Republican Party, then no, Trump's been very bad for them. If by being good for the Republican Party, you mean specifically them winning elections, probably not great for them. If by being good for the Republican Party, that you mean it'll have a diverse cast of characters that will have opportunities to be leadership, then no. I think it's going to be Trump as kingmaker for a while. But if by good for the Republican Party, you mean good for the country, because we're getting people that potentially are outside the established orthodoxy of the uniparty, then yes, Trump is good. So it's an interesting question. I think oftentimes people expect me to just come in and be like, rah, 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 Trump. And that's because the bar is so low, particularly for conservatives that are on panels or, Republicans that are on panels, that it's oftentimes like, oh, we're Republicans, but we hate Trump. And that's not me. So that puts me, but I'm not just going to be like, of course, Trump's great. Like, for example, I've already given, and I'm not giving away any secrets. I don't give a shit if any of these people who are watching them are going to be in the panel with. I don't care about that. I think I went into detail on this the other day with a caller. I think the best thing for the Republicans, I don't look at it as best thing for the Republicans. I look at it as best thing for people that want a party that is competently fighting back against the establishment, the sort of old uniparty. The best thing would have been for Trump to not run and to endorse Ron DeSantis. That would have gave them the best chance to win. And in my opinion, the best chance to win with someone who reasonably would potentially be an outsider. By Trump staying in, I legitimately think it hurts their chance. So the Republican Party that I gave a shit about pre-Trump was basically one guy, and that was Ron Paul. who identified as a Republican, and that's who I liked. That's who my first sort of politician that I actually respected was in my lifetime. They screwed Ron Paul over and over and over and over. But yeah, it's true. Nikki Haley would have had a better shot to win than Joe Biden or than Donald Trump. Absolutely true. But what does that look like for us that don't like the Uniparty? If it's literally, if your agenda is, I don't give a shit, I just like the R, anyone who's a Republican, all I want is more wins for Republicans and less for Democrats, in that sense, then yeah, Trump probably not good. But if you have ideas, policy ideas that you want accomplished, and they align more with Trump than they did with Paul Ryan's GOP or Mitt Romney's GOP, then I think he's been good because he's taken the party in a direction that I find more palpable. However, in doing so, he faces the wrath of the Uniparty, which is the Democrats and the old guard Republicans, which will make it less likely for him and people that follow him, people that he would support, to win elections, because now you're fighting not just the opponents, the other side, but also people within your own side. Zygmunt, what are you saying? Not Haley's agenda. I was saying a lot there, so. No, I like Ron Paul. Palpable and palatable. Palpable. Yeah, maybe I should use words that I can pronounce. There's a good... Yeah. Now, see, according to my restream calculator right now, I have 183 live viewers. But that's because it's saying that I have 100 on Twitch. I'm just going to talk like that. I've never, I'm proud to say I've never bought bots or anything like that. I can't say if people have used bots on my channel unknowingly, but I think there's a lot of streamers that intentionally inflate their accounts. I've never done that. But I'm not, I mean, technically I could say Twitter's saying I have 100 people watching. So, Warren, screw it. I'll keep streaming on this space, even though only Warren, thank you so much for listening on the space. I appreciate it. Again, apologize. I wouldn't have opened the space if I knew that there was only a couple. Zygmunt's a Chinese spy. We got more balloons coming across. Zygmunt loves those. No, Ron Paul's just a libertarian-esque Republican. Yeah, I know Sunflower. Yeah. Well, there we go. Thanks, Jay Halen. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, look, there's nothing to stare at. I have, right now, I'm not including Kick, Rumble, so just YouTube and Twitch, I have a total of 46 people watching on YouTube and 34 on Twitch. Let's assume that a dozen of those are watching on one person watching on multiple platforms. So I probably have 70 people watching, which is nothing to sneeze at. I think that's incredible. I used to stream to 2-3 people every night. I'd get excited if I got 10 people. So I'm certainly not complaining. Would I like to be a bigger channel? Sure, but this is my hobby. I'm honored that anyone wants to listen to me. So, make Birch Republicans great again. Would I consider myself more of a libertarian politically? Yes, I would consider myself libertarian adjacent. So I am a mix of conservatism and libertarianism is what I am. I lean more towards libertarianism. But before both of those, I consider myself a populist. I think that the foremost issue is corruption in our institutions. More than any one politician matters, these institutions that are corrupt matter because they will be there long after any one individual comes or goes. Thank you so much, Disabled Veteran. I appreciate the follow. That's how I legitimately feel. But It's ironic. Thank you, Nigel, for the super chat for $5. Are there any declassified documents you'd point to for center-left people to take a look at? Well, I don't know about declassified documents specifically. There are certainly those on issues that I focus on. So I think there are, read into just what happened with like the IG report from Horowitz into Crossfire Hurricane and the mid-year exam. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to Destiny. Don't listen to Rachel Maddow. Don't listen to Breitbart. You know, the people on Breitbart. Like, read that shit for yourself. And try to honestly keep an open mind and say, is this the sort of intel agencies that you want? Is this what you want them putting their thumb on the scale? But if the question you're asking is, are there examples of things where I feel that there's been corruption aimed at left-wing people? Yeah, certainly. Read the FBI's treatment of Martin Luther King and of people in the civil rights. They were despicable. I mean, they tried to get King to kill himself by blackmailing him. They probably, almost undoubtedly, had a role in his eventual murder. Understand that I'm the sort of like, when I was young, now granted, I've matured, if you could believe that, politically. But when I was, you want to know what the first political issue I got involved in? It was sort of cultural. But there was this guy named Jack Thompson. Does anyone remember Jack Thompson? I'll be 40 this year. Does anyone know who I'm talking about when I say Jack Thompson? Sunflower says it reminds me of a book, Big Intel, how the CIA and FBI went from Cold War heroes to deep state villains. Yeah. Jack Thompson was this lawyer in the 90s who had this crusade against video games. Yeah. And it was big. Right? He was all about Grand Theft Auto and Mortal Kombat, and we need to, right? It was this big thing. I think he may have been disbarred, but it was a big thing, and I hated that. And I started to read into the history of like censorship, and how then I started to get familiar with right before that. You had this big sort of rating scandal in the music industry, and there was this famous hearing on Congress where Dee Snider from Twisted Sister, the guys I think from Two Live Crew, that was this rap group that was being heavily censored, and John Denver, with these other characters, goes on Capitol Hill to advocate against sort of draconian censorship of the music industry. You know, prior to that, you could go back to weird censorship in comic books, where there was basically, even though a lot of it wasn't written, there had to be a comic book code because they were worried that the government was going to come in and censor. Then you had in stand-up comedy, like, you know, one of my heroes is Lenny Bruce, right? Who was this comedian who the Catholic Church was furious because he made anti-Catholic jokes, and they would basically send the police in these places where he was playing to sit there and wait for him to tell the Catholic jokes. Then they would arrest him for obscenity, right? You know Jack Thompson personally. That's crazy. Not the hockey player. You know the lawyer. He was disbarred. His son plays GTA all the time. It's funny. But that was that was from the right. Everyone understands that, right? The examples I just gave are what we would traditionally call censorship efforts from the right. Trying to get the government involved in saying you can't say certain things for religious reasons or puritanical reasons. I was against that. I was against George W. Bush. I was against the war in Iraq. I protested it. I thought Bush sucked. Horrible. I was against the Patriot Act, which was created while we had a Republican. Granted, the Democrats signed off on the shit, but that was supposedly the right. So if you're center left, understand this. I'm not your enemy. I'm not saying, and this is the misnomer, people think this all the time about me. Oh, you're just saying, you just care about Trump. That's all it is. You just give a shit about Trump. So you talk about corruption because you see that Trump's being attacked, but if it wasn't Trump, you wouldn't give a shit. That's not true. That's not true at all. I routinely talk about how third parties, even left-wing parties that I don't like the Green Party, absolutely get screwed over. Jill Stein at one point was accused of being a Russian plant. I talked about how absurd that was. Jill Stein's basically a socialist communist who I can't stand her policies. But she absolutely has the right to run unencumbered without the influence of our intel system that's going after her because they don't like her politics. So by no means am I the type of person that's just like, well, I only care. Here's another example. I was routinely talked about the FBI's mistreatment of Muslim Americans after 9/11. I don't particularly have an affinity for the Muslim religion. I feel about it much the same way I feel about Judaism. I have a proclivity to Christianity because I am a Christian, but as far as I'm concerned, if you are a person who I consider living a moral life and you get there through Islam or through Judaism or through atheism or through, whatever religion or ethical framework you have, as long as the actions you are taking align with mine as to what makes you a moral person, I'm all cool with it. Even if you're not a moral person, I don't necessarily think that means it should be illegal, obviously. But I'm just saying, there are multiple ways. I think Christianity is the best way, but I'm not going to crap on people that are trying to be good people and doing the right things that have a different framework and get to that same conclusion. That's fine by me. And I'm certainly not one here to sit and lecture religion. I'm not. I have my beliefs. They're important to me. There are a great many channels that do a far better job than me espousing the word of Christ and Christianity. It's just not my forte. I don't feel comfortable enough in it to do that. But you can go to my friend Let's Be Frank's channel. I know The Crucible has good people that talk about this stuff. But I'm not going to bash you if you're not Christian and I think you're trying to be a good person. I'm not going to. Right? It's not who I am. So, but I don't particularly, I think there is a huge problem with political Islam in the world. I really do. And I think there is, but that doesn't mean that the guy that's my neighbor that happens to be Muslim, who's an awesome guy. I don't have a Muslim neighbor right now, but I do know Muslims in my town that are legitimately awesome people. Like, okay, even if there's a lot of people in their religion I don't like, I like those dudes. They seem to be really good dudes, right? And it was not right for our intel agencies to be looking at every person of the Islam religion or the Muslim faith and going into mosques and spying on them and shit without any reason to doing so. Mecha Anime Protagonist says, if you're a true conservative, though, you need to admit that the Republicans of the past 10 years have basically been everything but conservative fiscally, and Trump certainly doesn't represent fiscal conservative. You're absolutely not wrong at all. First off, am I a true conservative? I don't know. I'm a populist first and foremost. I consider myself conservative-leaning, but also libertarian-leaning. There are certainly people that would say I'm not conservative. For example, they would say, well, conservatism means fiscal conservatism and social conservatism. And Rob, you're pro-gay marriage. So you're not fiscally, what are you conserving? And they have a point. The label doesn't mean shit to me, really, but they have a point. And some would say I don't even have a role in the Republican Party because the Republican Party should be the party of conservatism, and so people like me shouldn't have a role here. That's fine. You could say that. I don't care. But depending on how I think certainly fiscally conservatism, we should all be able to point to what that means, like less taxing, less spending, fiscal conservatism, balancing budgets, right? It is one of my huge criticisms of Donald Trump. Even before the pandemic, he was spending much more than I was comfortable with. And certainly he signed up. Now, are the Democrats worse? Of course. What we have is a Republican Party that's motto is spend, 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 and a Democratic Party whose motto is spend, 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 spend. So yeah, who in the Republican Party's fiscal... And I have this debate with people all the time because I'll have this argument with people. I'll say, well, the left in the United States, and then some smug person will go, there is no left. There is no left in the United States. What left? There is no left. And I say, okay, I'll play that game. I think to be right-wing means you have to be fiscally conservative. So there's no right-wing in the United States because there's no fiscal conservatives. Not in office, anyway. Maybe a handful. Maybe Rand Paul, Chip Roy, Thomas Massey. So, I mean, those sorts of labels. But yeah, I mean, if you're socially conservative, what have the Republicans done for you? Nothing. Well, I think the idea of... I don't disagree, Mecca. Like, a complete elimination of taxes would be beyond conservatism, fiscal conservatism. That would be libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism. Right? Yeah, so responsible spending and taxation, right, would be fiscal conservatism. We certainly don't have that. We have massive deficits. But if it wasn't for people who felt like you, Trump wouldn't have made it into office. the non-conservative. Well, who was conservative? This is the problem I have with people. So, like, I argue with people like John Burke that's like, well, Trump's not a real conservative. Okay, well, who was a real conservative leading the Republican Party before Trump? Who was it? Paul Ryan? Mitt Romney? John McCain? Mitch McConnell? John Boehner? Point to me the real conservative of that group. Go ahead. So the argument, it's like, well, you and people like you that voted for Trump and endorsed Trump, you're what's responsible for the Republican Party not being conservative. Am I? Or is it just a long-standing tradition? My guy was Ron Paul. He was a libertarian conservative. That's who I wanted. I fought hard for Ron Paul. Trump's more conservative in some issues than those prior Republicans I've said. But I'm not a good metaphor for that because I don't consider myself a conservative as my sole value. And there are people that consider them conservatives of sole value. I'm a populist. My central issue is corruption. So would I be willing to vote for someone that's maybe not socially conservative? For example, someone who's for gay marriage and someone who is for the legalization of marijuana. Maybe those aren't conservative positions. Maybe even someone that's like, and I'll accept abortion up to 15 weeks. That's not a conservative position. But that wants to end the corruption? Yeah, I take that person. The conservatives might say, no, we don't like that, Rob. You're responsible for helping to end conservatism, to which my response is, but conservatism isn't my core value. Populism is. So the criticism might have more effect on a person who calls themselves a conservative and then voted for Trump, and you're like, but here's all the ways he isn't conservative, and it's your fault for voting for a guy like this. But even still, I think the criticism of, well, who was conservative? Who else in that election? Jeb Bush? If they didn't nominate Trump in 2016 as a Republican primary, who is the guy that was actually a conservative? Do I think Trump was draining the swamp? No, Trump was not draining the swamp. Was he attempting to? Depends on what you mean. I think he had good intentions. I really do. But I think at his core, I think this is what Trump thinks is how you get difficult shit done. You bring in two guys or women, whatever, don't matter. Two smart people. And you go, okay, we got this idea and we got this idea. You guys hash it out. And then Trump sits there and's like, yeah, we'll go, this is what we'll do. After hearing out those people, right? I think that's sort of how Trump is. So I think Trump thought, yeah, drain the swamp, and I'll be able to do it. I'll be able to hear this shit out and pick the best idea and we'll be good. And the problem was he surrounded himself by terrible people. Now, on one hand, I could understand it because the swamp is so significant that where do you find people to fill these positions outside of the swamp? So you have to appoint all of these positions to the executive. You saw Trump tried to appoint people that were relatively neophytes, like Carter Page. What happened there? George Papadopoulos. How'd that work out? So who are you going to get? John Bolton? Jartaker says, you say populism outweighs your conservatism on these issues, but if you would choose a left-wing populist over a conservative institutionalist. Not only would I have. I would have absolutely voted for Bernie Sanders over Jeb Bush. In a heartbeat. Like that. I'd vote, if it was Nikki Haley versus Joe Biden, I would vote for RFK. RFK hates gun rights. An issue that I think is very important. I'd still vote for RFK because I think he's more of a populist. So yeah, that's absolutely true. The problem right now is there are almost no Democrats that are even paying lip service to the cause of populism. The ones that once existed, arguably people in the Squad and people like Bernie Sanders, they have completely capitulated on every major issue when it comes to what our institutions want. Every single one. But there are left-wing people, certainly, that would advocate for all sorts of positions that I would be antithetical to, that if they ran for office, I would pick over 95% of Republicans that are elected. Russell Brand's a left-winger. I would agree with him fighting for populism. I could say the same about a litany of other people that aren't really running for office. But it's a reasonable point, Jurtaker. If populism is my central issue, would I be willing to take someone I thought was a populist left-winger over someone that I thought was an institutionalist right-winger? Absolutely I would. Without a doubt. Now, if I have to choose between institutionalist right-winger or institutionalist left-winger, I'm probably choosing institutionalist right-winger or not choosing at all. Depends on how institutionalist they are. Russell Brand's a grifter. Maybe Vivek's a grifter. Maybe Joe Rogan's a grifter. Maybe Aaron Matei's a grifter. Maybe Michael Schellenberger and Jimmy Dore. Could be. I haven't looked in deeply to Russell Brand's politics other than to know he's a left-winger and that a lot of the things he's been saying about the vaccines and things like that are true. Yes, it is true that there are people that are operating in bad faith, that are grifters or that are putting on a show because they think it gets them money or views or votes or whatever. And those people should attempt to be avoided. But when we're in a system that is so bad institutionally, where you have people openly calling, for the censorship of their opponents, the locking up of their opponents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where it's evident that the average person just basically doesn't have a voice anymore, right? Then you'll take even a person that you suspect of being a grifter, but's at least saying the right things, over someone that you know is an institutionalist. Let's say AOC. She's someone who cheered for people to harass right-wingers, and then when it happened to her the other day, she's very furious. The point of protest is to make them uncomfortable, but not against me. And she's shit. Grifter is what she is. Do I think that Trump's political naivety allowed him to be fooled by the swamp people he was trying to drain? Yeah, that's basically what I think happened. But there is a school of thought that says that he was never going to drain the swamp in the first place, and that could certainly be true. The end results are what's most important. He didn't drain the swamp. And arguably we're worse off after the election of Donald Trump than we would have been had it been Hillary Clinton. And what I mean by that, and I've talked about this for years, is at least the corruption was sort of thinly veiled before the election of Trump. After Trump was elected, it was a mask-off moment. You got to see how corrupt the FBI was. You got to see how the mainstream media was just carrying water for them. You got to see how all of these supposed left-wing people that cared about sort of fighting back against, big, powerful establishments were all for those establishments as long as it meant going after the political candidate they didn't like. The mask was off. It was laid bare for everyone to see. And they got away with it. They absolutely got away with it. And now they don't have to have the mask on anymore. They'll just tell you to your face, yeah, we got to keep your candidate off the ballot for democracy. Yeah, we have to censor you for democracy. Yeah, we got to lockdowns. Fuck it. Who cares? Yeah, we lied about it. We don't give a shit. No, we have to censor you if you say that this virus came from a lab in China. I'm sorry. So in many ways, Trump claiming he was going to drain the swamp and then winning and not draining it actually ends up worse. But that doesn't mean that I won't give him a chance to do it again. At the very least, Trump isn't actively trying to, attack people like me. The Biden administration is. They will go after me when I go to a school board and I talk about the indoctrination of children there. They will advocate for policies that censor messages like mine online, that lock up people that were my friends, that were peaceful, that were there January 6th. That's what they'll do. They're creeping us closer to World War III as they spend us into oblivion and doom my child to the dollar not meaning anything. Yeah, of course I'm still voting. But I suspect very heavily that even if Trump wins, he'll make most of the same mistakes that he made previously. But still, am I familiar with Tom Woods? I do not know him. No. Yeah, Javier did it. Millier, absolutely. Doing a good job, though. You'll see. What's going to happen is the establishment order in the world is going to heavily attack Millier in Argentina. All sorts of economic policies, etc. And then they'll point to it and say, see, look how bad it's doing. So we'll see if they can survive that. What would I do in my first day in office? Very first action would be setting a final date no more than 180 days for the FBI. Immediately creating a task force to go through every classified document they had with the goal of releasing as much of that information as possible to the American people. Then starting an investigation to any criminal activity therein of the FBI, CIA, NSA, other organizations like that. And that'd be the very first thing I would do. That's funny. I see your post there, Roland. Yeah, it's okay to disagree with people politically. That's absolutely true. But there are fundamental things, like right? Like, think about this. Like, I remember having this argument with the person that was kind of a centrist in the debate community. Now, I'm young. I'm like 19, and I was a Ron Paul guy, or maybe 20. I was a Ron Paul guy, and all these lefties hated that. The only thing they liked about me and Ron Paul was we were against the Iraq War. Other than that, they hated Ron Paul. They didn't like the idea of fiscal conservatism, and etc. And I had this one friend that was like, well, what you need is a compromise. That's what you need. Ron Paul's unwilling to compromise. And it's like, well, what's the compromise? Because Ron Paul's basically a libertarian, so he's like, I don't think the government should have control over your life. And then like the authoritarian lefties are like, nah, I disagree. I think we should have control over your life. What's the compromise? Okay, you guys should have half control over my life. And it's one of the things I liked about Jordan Peterson, right? I'll try to play the clip here. But Jordan Peterson, one of his first times on Joe Rogan, where he asks, how did we get here? I'll play that for you in a second. 1 second. Mecca says, but I'm a socialist with a blend of capitalism. The hardest part of right now is trying to get people to understand that we mostly want the same things. But we get distracted by drama and culture war. I think we can fix the fundamental problems that we have and nothing to do with politics and go from there. Well, I don't disagree. I used to think that was true, that the majority of us want the same things. For example, a socialist doesn't want people to be poor. They don't want people being homeless. They don't want people committing crime. They don't want people starving. They don't want people dying of disease. They don't want war. And I agree with that. We disagree on how to get to that position. And that's certainly true of many, many people. The problem is that's not the way I see the establishment. Many of the people that vote for these establishment politicians and stuff, they certainly aren't evil, terrible people. They're just being misled, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm friends with plenty of lefties. I really am. However, like when you have people that are like actively, like climate change people that are actively cheering for the end of fossil fuels, knowing that will lead to a radical diminished economy, but they think that's good. Like, what do we have in common with that group of people? Or people that think that you should be fired from your job and not allowed to go out if you don't take the medication that you want, or that they want. How do I rationalize that? 1/3 of Democrats polled in a YouGov poll said that they thought that my child should be taken away from me if I don't get the COVID vaccine. What the fuck is that? What's the compromise there? How do I be like, you're a good person though? Like, that's tough, right? Or they cheer for the weaponization of the FBI to go after mass groups of people and politicians that are considered. What's the compromise? Or they want pornography in school. Like you say, culture war shit. But it's prevalent. The culture is more important than politics. We have debates. If I told you 20 years we were going to have debates such as the following. In fact, let's play a couple clips. Let's do that. I don't even have to give you the hypothetical. Here's Dennis Prager on Bill Maher's show. Let's see if I can find the clip. Oh, help if I had the window up. Come on, Boomer.
To say that men can menstruate is a lie, and that is what is said.
Wait, where did that?
You never heard it, right? Okay, check it out. Anyone who says a man cannot menstruate is considered transphobic.
I missed this whole story.
You did?
I did.
I agree.
Now tell me where you're getting this.
Just Google it. Can men menstruate?
Who is saying this? You're
Who
talking
is
about a
saying it?
very small
No,
percentage.
oh, really?
Dennis, I remember you in the old show. You were a little more reasonable.
What did I say that wasn't unreasonable?
You said that we think that men menstruate and no one does. We never even. Have you heard about it?
I'm a doctor. I missed that one, I confess.
And this is one of the premier reporters. I mean, he knows everything. These people are very. He's a doctor.
Okay.
He's one of the great.
I would make a friendly bet that the LGBTQ normative statement is men can menstruate. To say that.
So when people complain about the culture, well, you know, the culture war, that's 2019. That was 2019, 4 years ago. It was laughed out. Meanwhile, in the schools, that's the shit that was being taught. I've seen it. Right, when people talk about culture war, I was debating between 2003 and 2008 was when I debated in college, which is the left of the left. Then I coached and judged debates for another 4 or 5 years after that, pretty regularly. Okay? Yeah, give me a second, Key Lime. I walked into round after round and said, you're white people, you shouldn't live. You shouldn't be allowed to be in this country. You should have to give all of your possessions to people of color. These aren't rando people. So, now, granted, many of those might have just been college students that went on to do things that will never affect you. Many of them were people that were top of their class in Harvard or the military academy or the naval academy. I saw this shit happening in real time. I'd come back and I'd tell my friends, be like, you should hear this crazy shit that they say. Nah, no one's saying that. Now it's mainstream policy. I still can't debate trans issues on Twitch because I will immediately be banned for saying what I think. And it ain't bigoted or a call to violence or a call to treat people terribly. Doesn't matter. It was policy and they're trying to reinstitute it on X that you can't say that there are only two sexes. And so when people say, well, you just need to stop fighting these stupid culture wars. What, allowing pornography? Teaching sex to kids in first, second grade? No thanks. That's an issue that we should be talking about. Show me an example where there are teachers teaching that males can menstruate. All right, so I used a Brave search engine. Just look how confident this person is. You ready? Here's the first example from the Telegraph. Boys can have periods too. Children to be taught in latest victory for transgender campaigners. This is Helena Horton in December 2018. School children will be taught that all genders could have periods in new sex education classes in a victory for transgender right campaigners. Oops, sorry, screwed up. You were saying? You were saying? You said I wouldn't do it. Well, I did it with literally the first article that came up. So mea culpas? Admitting you're wrong now? Show an example of it happening. Right, so because I didn't have a camera in the class, I just had the articles showing that it was the official policy of the UK that their teachers now, when talking health classes, would teach that all genders can menstruate. All right, man. Hey, thanks, Mecca. Thank you so much. I'm just going to ignore you the rest of the night. Thanks. You can see. But where's your camera in the class? Where is it? Where's your camera in the class showing that this has happened? That's right. I could show 5 examples of it. Those are just outliers. Of course, the official teaching guide says that this is what to be taught. I saw that, Nate G. I saw that post. UK's arrested 10 times more people for social media posts than Russia. Here's the other clip I was going to show. One of my favorite Jordan Peterson clips.
This sort of process, and this is a...
What is this? Oh, by the way, apologies. Oh, Key Lime's still there. We'll get to you in a second. If I can figure this out. What is happening? Okay. Jeez, oh man.
Yes, I just don't understand how it gets to the point where
things get to terrible places one tiny step at a time. You know, if I encroach on you and I'm sophisticated about it, I'm going to encroach 2 millimeters. I'm going to encroach right to the point where you start to protest. Then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to wait. Then you're going to calm down. Then I'm going to encroach again right to the point where you protest. Then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to wait. And I'm just going to do that forever. And before you know it, you're going to be back 3 miles from where you started, and you'll have done it one step at a time. And then you'll go, oh, how'd I get here? And the answer was, well, I pushed you a little farther than you should have gone, and you agreed. And so then I pushed you a little farther than you should have gone again, and you agreed. And if anybody's interested in this sort of process, and this is a horrifying book, if you want to read about how this process works, you can read a book called Ordinary Men by Robert Browning. And Ordinary Men is about, Browning was interested in how the Nazis trained how they trained people to kill, basically. And so Robert Browning studied this police battalion. It's a very interesting book. So these were middle-aged German men. So they were raised and educated really before Hitler came to power. So they weren't indoctrinated Nazis. They were policemen. And when the Nazis went through Poland and then needed to impose their brand of order on Poland, they brought policemen in. They brought this battalion of middle-aged policemen in. And their commandant, their commander, was by all accounts a pretty decent guy. And he told them that because it was wartime, they were probably going to have to do some pretty terrible things, but that they could go home if they didn't think they were up to it. So there was no compulsion. You know, this wasn't a Milgram experiment or an experiment where you had to obey orders. The guy who was giving the orders said, look, this is going to be awful, but you can back off. But the guys thought, well, I'm not going to leave my comrades here to do the dirty work, you know, which is kind of a virtue in a perverse way. And then Browning details how they went from ordinary policemen to guys who were taking naked pregnant women out into the middle of fields and shooting them in the back of the head. And they were physically ill during most of the transformation process. You know, they started out by rounding up the Jewish men between the ages of 16 and 65. Well, you know, you can kind of understand that because you're at war. And then they put them in stadiums. And then they had to shoot some of them. And then they had to load them on cattle cars. It was like one step at a time. These guys were having a dreadful time of it. They didn't stop. They didn't stop. And so that's how things get to where they are now, is that, I mean, I know they're not at that point, and I'm not trying to make the case that they're at that point.
Well, you're one of the first people that's sounding an alarm, that there's a real issue with controlling people. There's a real issue with controlling dialogue, controlling the way people communicate, and that these ideologies, although seemingly not...
You get the gist. All right, Key Lime wanted to talk, I think. Go ahead, Key Lime, if you wanted to talk. Go for it. What do you want to talk about? I'd like to be out of here by 10:45, wrapping up by then, but... Should we just rag on Key Lime for his terrible abortion opinions again? Maybe he's not there now, so... Yeah, I was taking calls. We were going through my, excuse me, what do you call it? Spaces that I'm doing. I was hoping for people that disagreed with me, but... Alright, what do we got? Request. Alright, there we go.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you. What's up?
Oh, okay. Hey, how's it going?
Good, good.
How's my mic quality? I hope it's not too bad.
It's fine. It started off a little hairy there, but it sounds better now.
Yeah, if it's bad, I'm just gonna blame Elon Musk. I feel like it's better on Discord.
Yeah. So what's up?
I mean, there's a lot of topics I'm sure we can talk about. I also don't have as much time, so.
Okay, so pick one. It'll be easier.
I mean, you guys were talking about prison earlier. I'm curious. You believe that punishment and rehabilitation both serve a purpose?
Yes.
I guess, like, what purpose do you see punishment serving? Because that's what I have a hard time with.
Punishment serves a twofold purpose. One, it serves a purpose of deterrence, and second, it serves a purpose of justice. And that people will only live in a society. Society is very complicated, and it requires a lot of us to acquiesce to things that may necessarily not want to do. So we all give away some of our autonomy so that we could have a more beneficial society as a whole. We do that legally, but we also do that personally and culturally. So we are not compelled in some ways, for example, to do things that we consider to make society function in a polite way. For example, there's no law that says that I have to stand in line at the grocery store. We could all be animals and burst through and try to do anything, but we understand quickly how if anyone overly acted in their own personal self-interest in that way, that society would quickly fall apart, even to the point then where what would you try to do? Compel people through use of more laws? Part of the agreement that comes in that society is a basic concept of justice. And that is that if people aggrieve you in certain ways that we all say are illegitimate, that there has to be some form of justice that's attempted to be perceived. So for example, let me just throw out a hypothetical to you. If someone's having a very bad day because they got fired and then they decide to get blackout drunk and then they decide to grab a firearm and shoot my family in the head, and they sober up and say, my God, I feel so terrible about that. But you have to understand, I only did that because I was blackout drunk. I would never do something like that. And the psychiatrist says, yes, there's obvious contrition here. It was one moment of weakness that caused them to drink. They don't intend to be a homicidal maniac. Therefore, we recommend no jail time, no punishment whatsoever. Would you agree with that?
I probably not right away. It would depend on the case. There is a not exactly in the same way, but there was a case kind of similar to this, where there was a man who I don't know the details of it, so I might bastardize some of it, but there was a man whose child was molested or assaulted or kidnapped, maybe all of the above, by another individual. And as this individual was being arrested by the police and brought through an airport, the man shot him in the head from like a phone booth. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Or?
Oh,
Okay.
you're talking about shit, I can't remember his name, but yes, I know this
pretty
story.
famous.
It's from the 80s, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and the judge ruled that this individual should
That's,
not.
by the way, I will just say this literally has as little in common as possible about this hypothetical that I just outlined. Because what you're going to say is the judge was lenient. In fact, I don't know that they recommended any jail time. That's the end of the story, correct?
Yeah, they had him do some community service and things like that.
So the difference in that scenario is a person that was getting vengeance for his child that was attacked by a monster versus my scenario is a person who, because they were in a bad situation, chose to consume alcohol to the point of being blacked out, then picked up a firearm and murdered innocent people, not because they had assaulted his family, but did so because he was blackout drunk. That's a completely different scenario.
Well, I think that's where we're looking at it differently, where I see them separate in that the one scenario they said this person has no likelihood to ever commit an act like this again because the only reason they did so was this one other individual committed a horrible atrocity against a close family member. In the other example, you have less information to believe that this will never happen again from that individual. So that's where I see the difference in the two. But I think that the reasoning behind it is kind of in line with what I'm coming from of, I think that if you do have reasonable belief that it will not occur again because of whatever circumstances it is, I think that it is okay to, I guess, waive the punishment aspect of it because I don't see the purpose it serves.
Okay, well, it serves the purpose of what's going to happen is if that was my family that was killed, hypothetically, and a judge says, oh, we had 5 psychiatrists look at this person, it'll never happen again. You know what I would do immediately?
You probably shouldn't say on
right,
but yeah.
Is that the society you want to live in? Okay, then we'll take matters into our own hand. And then when someone takes the matter in your own hand, you would say, well, you can't punish that person either, right? They just did it that one time because they were upset. That's the society you just advocated for. Right? Did I lose you?
Sorry, I keep muting myself and unmuting. Yeah, no, I think that it depends on the individual. It's really tough for me to generalize these things. I think like case by case is how it really should be looked at. I know that it's oftentimes like my I guess view on this is misrepresented because it's shortened in terms of just saying like, oh, like one psychiatrist looks at this person, says they're good to go, I let them out, right? I think
said
that it
5.
should be very thorough.
Right. Okay, so again, very thorough, right? Even still, in that situation, so for 3 months, they have 15 psychiatrists come in, and every single one's like, genuinely, this guy never even touches alcohol. He did it this one time because his wife cheated on him and left him. He happened to be a bad drunk, got blacked out. Genuinely, he seems like he'll never drink alcohol again. This will never happen again. Next psychiatrist comes in, says the same thing. Next comes in, says the same thing. Next comes in, says the same thing. I could keep doing this for 5 minutes if you want. And then eventually they say, okay, no jail time for you. You're out, man. All these psychiatrists said you're good to go. And then I am upset because there is literally no punishment or justice for my family that was just murdered. So I take the law into my own hand. Then in your society, you would say, okay, yes, he should have been let go because it wasn't just one psychiatrist. It was a dozen, or how many you would be happy with, whatever your arbitrary number would be. And then I commit that heinous act and you say, well, Rob also shouldn't be punished because... And so that will be society. What will happen is you just go back to a society where we no longer have law enforcement taking actions, punitive actions against people. So people say, fine, if there is no punitive actions anymore, there's just rehabilitative actions. And I could say, well, I only took the heinous action I took in an act of vengeance, and I wouldn't do that to a normal person. I only did it because this person got drunk and killed my kid in a car wreck, or killed my kid in some way, or this person stole from me, or whatever. That's why I did it. You would say those people should also never be punished. And so we would literally have a system of, you would literally incentivize capital vigilante justice on a regular basis. And you would say the people committing those capital vigilante justice should not be punished in any way, correct?
No, I don't think they should be punished. I think they should be attempted to be rehabilitated. Again, I don't think that it's going to. It depends on case by case. It really depends.
So if someone, let's just take another hypothetical. Someone robs a person of all of their personal possessions. Person who gets robbed upset, chooses to take the law in his own hand, commits grievous physical violence against the other person. I would never do that again, Your Honor. I talked to a psychiatrist. They say, yeah, he has no history of ever engaged in violence in any way, shape, or form. He only did it this one time because of the horrible abuse that he suffered from the form of his property that he worked hard for. Therefore, we're recommending no need for rehabilitation. Maybe he attends a class every month that's just like, hey, don't flip out if your property gets damaged. Good enough, right?
Yeah, again, I think it would take a lot longer to come to that conclusion than in these analogies or examples.
Okay, a year. Yeah. Okay, so where are they stationed for that year while that's occurring?
If it's a violent crime, then they're removed from society. They would be in what typically our prison system today.
Yeah, I just think that this is a problem with, like, and again, I at least respect that you stick to your convictions. It's just like most people that have these sort of extreme positions, you are literally so fucking dog shit stupid. It's just, I mean, I don't know what to say. You're literally advocating for a system where vigilante, literally someone could get blind drunk and fucking murder your family and be out in the street within 3 months if the right second. You're like, the only stumbling block you have to that scenario. You agree with the entire scenario, except I think it would take more than 3 months for that amount of psychiatrists to visit that person. Now, we haven't even gotten into the problem of relying on psychiatry in the first place. For example, psychiatry gets shit wrong for perverse incentives all the time, right? For example, we have doctors that were just released the WPATH files that shows how all of these doctors are ignoring obvious problems with all of the prescriptions and surgeries they're offering with trans people. And yet we have an entire industry that offers that shit. We've had the medical industry overprovide opioids for people over and over again. We have them overdose children on anxiety medications like Ritalin over and over again. But we're going to rely solely on these people. People, by the way, that many of them testify on behalf of defense all the time. And we can see law enforcement professionals themselves in places like New York City that want a bail-less society, which puts criminals back on the street. And so we see crime increasing in those areas again. And you're like, I see that and I want to triple down. Not only do I want those criminals on the street, I want even the most violent of murderers to be left on the street. As long as we have whatever your arbitrary distinction is on a psychiatrist says it's okay.
Yeah, so I think my issue stems from the idea that I do not think that vengeance should be justice, right? I think that
it's not.
justice
Vengeance
and
in
our legal
itself
system-
isn't justice. Vengeance would be if justice isn't served. So, for example, vengeance would be that justice wasn't served, that we have a legal system that is supposed to be based on some sense of morality that says if you engage in a harmful, violent action or harmful actions, then we have a legal system that, based on a sense of justice, punishes you. Vengeance would be justice could not be received, and so I choose to take it into my own act in a hand of vengeance. You're actually advocating for vengeance. Your system would incentivize people taking the law into their own hands. And then when they do, you would say, well, we can't punish them either, which would provide an incentive for people to seek retributive vengeance on their own. That's different than justice. Punishment can be part of justice.
I don't think that this would lead to even 1% of people being released.
That is absolutely okay, then you're literally advocating for nothing. I don't even know what you're saying.
I'm advocating for...
Let me ask you this.
Because I haven't been able to state my whole claim, but yeah, go ahead.
Will you agree with the following statements? One, there are plenty of psychiatrists that even with the most violent of criminals are willing to say that they are no longer a threat to society. In fact, almost every defense provides someone that says that. You could basically for hire provide someone, a doctor that will say that, correct?
Yeah, there's plenty of psychiatrists that'll be wrong about anything. Yes.
Oh, well, it has nothing. Okay. So then you tell me, in your ideal system, how do you ensure that the psychiatrist that you are giving this sole authority to determine whether or not someone should be kept away from the general population, even in the most heinous of crimes, even in the most heinous of crimes involving children or involving killing people or involving sexual assaults, all of it's on the table. None of them should ever be punished. The only contributing factor should be, would they do it again? And so how do we determine that? Well, there's some expert that makes that decision. Who is that expert?
I would say you go again by not just one individual, but by multiple, in the same way we do with a jury system, for example, where, the average person probably doesn't have that good of a grip on the law or legal things. But when you trust 12 people and you give them the case in front of them, they're able to at least try to do a good job. And we trust that for our system in the same way of people that are child molesters or rapists or any of those other things you named.
That's absurd, right? Because, let's further go with this. So now we have a jury composed of who? Who's on these juries now?
I'm not saying it's a jury. I'm saying we simply
It is a jury-like system. There is a group of people. So you're saying, yes. Okay. So first off, are you talking purely psychiatrist?
I would be open to other
okay, so give me the examples of the people that... So you're saying it's not one person. There is a board of people. How many people are on this board of people? Give me a rough figure. 3 people, 12 people, 30 people?
I mean, I don't have an exact number. I feel like
it's
12 is just what I'll go with for the sake of the conversation.
You're advocating for a radically different system, and you don't even have the base facts, what you're talking. All I need is a ballpark. I'm not saying you have to hold to this. When I outline exactly what your scenario lead to, you say, no, that's not what it would look like, because it wouldn't just be one person, it would be multiple people. I say, okay, then give me the broad strokes idea of what multiple people looks at. 3 people, 5 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, 20,000. What is the broad body that will make this decision? What does it look like in general?
I mean, I would like to say 12. I would like to say more, but I don't really know. It really depends on how much resources we have in reality.
Okay, so let's say 12 just for the sake of argument. And what are the professions of these people? Give me the types of people that are qualified to say whether a child rapist should be allowed back on the street, because we're not interested in punishing the child rapist. The only question is whether or not he will rape another child. So what professions make up this board to let these people out?
So I would say psychologists and psychiatrists for sure. I would say also anyone who is an expert in criminal psychology, although they may not have degrees in psychology, but people that spent a lot of time in the criminal justice system, whether as detectives or other people working in terms of, catching people, studying the behavior, profilers, and also people that worked in the rehabilitation aspect of it.
Okay, so we have people that work in prison rehabilitation, we have psychologists, psychiatrists, and people involved that maybe don't have a degree as a psychologist, but involved in criminal psychology. Pretty good list?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, child rapist comes up. 7 of the 12 of those people on that board say, I don't think you'll do it again. Guy released?
7 of the 12, probably not good enough.
Okay, how many? 12 out of 12?
I would like to see 12 out of 12.
Okay, 12 out of 12. Next question. Does it mean that we should only release people since we're not interested in punishment? We're only interested in will the offense happen again? Let's say someone robs a convenience store. They should never be left out of prison until that board says that they won't do it again, correct?
Was it a violent crime?
Yeah, sure. They stuck a gun up to the clerk.
Yeah.
So we're now affecting, and you're saying, so what you've just advocated for will actually lead to a vast increasement of people imprisoned, according to your own logic. Do you understand why?
Well, you remove all non-violent crimes and only have violent crimes. Yeah.
It's so anyone who's ever committed any act of violence, for example, guy lays hands on his girlfriend, that's now effectively a life sentence.
It could be if this person, again, like if this person very clearly is showing signs that they are likely to do this again, then yeah.
But you already said it. I quote what you said. It would only result in 1% of people getting through this board.
In the way that you described, like a person that went and like cold-blooded murdered another person, yeah. I feel like that's very unlikely, or like a serial rapist.
So just to be clear, and this board, though, they're not deciding whether or not this person committed such a heinous crime. You're saying once it meets the metric that we include violence, the only question the board decides is whether or not they would do it again, correct?
Yeah, whether this person is likely to commit a crime of a similar nature, yeah.
Right, so then your argument that, when you said it would only be 1% of people would only be murderers, well, that's going to apply to any violent crime, right? Because the idea, like, committing a murder, the chance of a murderer committing a murder again, unless you have some psychological impairment and you're like a serial killer or something, right? The chance is probably very low. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I guess like when
so
I was
let me finish. So
number,
then when you say when you're talking about when you say I'm talking about murderers and only 1% of them would get out, when you're admitting that it would be easier to prove you would never take that action again than say someone who smacked their girlfriend, that would mean the person who smacked their girlfriend would effectively, on general, be given a longer sentence on average than the person who committed murder, because it'll be an easier time for someone who committed murder to prove, dude, I probably wouldn't do that again, than the guy who laid hands on his girlfriend.
Well, I would say, like, again, like crime of that nature as well, right? So, like, violent crime, if this person had been, like, shown signs of, like, physical violence throughout their childhood and then they murdered somebody.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that most you already said that there's probably do you think more people that commit murder only do it once than people that beat their girlfriend do it once? In other words, average person that hits their girlfriend, do you think, what's the average times they do it? Probably dozens. Average person that commits a murder, probably one. So in that effect, when you say similar crimes, well, murderer doesn't necessarily beat his girlfriend. In fact, many murders might be crimes of opportunity. You know, you're a drug dealer and someone didn't pay, so you shoot them. You're probably not doing that stuff on a regular basis. The guy who beats his girlfriend probably is. So on average, you would have to admit, will you just give me a yes or no? There is a significant chance that on average, this will result on people that do things like hit their spouse being imprisoned longer on average than people that commit murder.
I would think probably would be my guess, yeah.
And you're okay with that system. I just got you to admit that the legal system that you want is a system that the end result of it would be people that commit simple assault would end up being jailed longer than people that commit murder.
Yeah, but it's not simple assault, right? You used a specific example here of like a crime that is usually repeated. Right?
That's
not
still
like some guy that got into a bar fight.
Simple assault against your girlfriend, whatever the specific term would be. And why would simple assault be any different? Right, that's still an act of violence, correct?
I think that's the entire problem with our legal system is like we look at it through a lens of punishment rather than looking at through a lens of like, is this person likely to be a threat to society? And if they are, then they shouldn't be in society. And if they are not, then they're welcome to come back.
Why would simple assault be any different than spousal abuse?
Because a person that like gets into a fight outside of a bar is less likely to like domestic violence is usually like a pattern of behavior that.
You don't think bar fights are?
I think.
Where do you live? Have you ever been to a bar? I've bartended. I could tell you that the people. I could point to you the 6 people in a bar who was most likely to get in a fight in any given night when I bartended. Same characters over and over again. So those guys that get in bar fights, that's still assault. So those people would be more likely to commit that again. And the only metric you have is an act of violence. We haven't even got to the absurd portion where you say that people that commit crimes that we consider crimes that aren't an act of violence shouldn't be jailed. We haven't even got to that. You're just saying anyone who commits an act of violence should be jailed, and they should be detained until a board says that they're likely to not commit violence again. People that get in fights in bar probably are the type of people that don't mind getting in fights and have done it many, many times. In fact, I would say that probably that if you looked at a swath of bar fights across any given state, probably 80% of those bar fights are people that are repeat bar fight people included in it. That's probably a higher percentage than recidivism for wife beating.
I don't know. I'd have to look at the numbers, but I would, off my gut, disagree. But if that's the case, then it should be the same way of, like, again, I'm not saying that I should be the person that looks at it.
I'm not saying you are. I'm saying, but you're
yeah.
admitting that there's a significant chance that the bar fighter, the guy who hits his wife, on average will have lengthier jail sentences than the killer.
I think, honestly, it's probably easier to change the behavior for a person that has committed a less violent crime.
That's not true at all. The recidivism for less violent crimes is way higher than the recidivism for murder.
Yeah, I mean, that is true.
Again, this is just your policy collapse. Again, this doesn't address the fact that there needs to be an element of punishment for a concept of justice. It doesn't address that. It doesn't address the fact that this will encourage vigilantism, because as you let these people out with slaps on the wrist saying, no, we never want to punish a human, that other people will see that and say, well, then I won't get punished, and I will take vengeance into my own hands since the legal system no longer does it. I mean, I could show you right now court footage of people that are arrested for, like, murdering a woman, and that woman's family, like, lunging to attack the person in the courtroom. You've seen that, right?
Yeah, I have, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you're on that board, right, and that dude gets left out after, like, a year, because it's like, well, the psychiatrist says he's a changed man, and that dad that lunged over is now waiting with, a lethal weapon, and is like, okay, I'll take care of this business. You would understand that board would likely say, yeah, this dude's probably not going to do that again because this was an act of retributive vengeance. And because we're not interested in punishment, we could say, he doesn't have any other daughters. He's lived his whole life without being accused of any sort of violence. So we're just going to say, yep, good to go. And so now every parent that wants to jump over is now got carte blanche. Hell, they could do it in the court. And you would say, well, that's understandable. They're not likely to be a repeat offender, so there's no disincentive to that behavior whatsoever. Thank you, mister. I really appreciate the follow. And now we get into even the most ridiculous portion. What do you do to someone who commits a property crime that steals your shit?
I want to answer that. Let me quickly go back to the 1% really quickly, because I just want to clarify that I was saying that I think in regards to what you were implying that, like, people are just going to be in and out in 3 months.
Why wouldn't?
Like, or even a year.
Well, okay,
because I think it takes a lot longer to determine whether they're going to be
but you wouldn't want it to be lengthy just for the sake of being lengthy, correct? Because you don't believe in any sort of punishment. So if it was possible for this panel to meet the next day, to talk to this gentleman for 6 hours and come to the legitimate conclusion, look, he only did it this one time because his daughter was raped and murdered, would you have any problem if they say it's our heartfelt belief after talking to this man, there isn't a danger of this happening again, of letting him out in one day?
Sorry, repeat that.
If that angry parent that we just talked about, right?
Mm-hmm.
He does this, they take him in front of this panel the next day because you don't believe in punishment. So there wouldn't be a sort of minimum time you have to be there. That would be punishment for punishment's sake. All that matters to you is, does this panel say this person won't be a recidivist? So if we let him go, he's not likely to do this again. And for whatever reason, it takes, maybe a week. The guy's in jail for a week, and then he gets in front of his initial hearing to the panel. And the panel hears him for like 6 hours, and they legitimately have a heartfelt belief, like, dude, this guy only did it because it was his daughter that was assaulted. He's not going to do this again. He doesn't have another daughter. And they say, yeah, you're good to go. You wouldn't have a problem with that. You would say, that's fair.
No, I would have a major problem with that.
Why?
I think, because, again, that's not how I think that you would aptly ascertain whether this person is a threat or not. You'd need to talk to them for hours on end over an extended period of time.
Okay, so explain, are you a psychologist?
I studied psychology, but I'm not a psychologist.
So you would be someone who would be eligible to be in one of the panels that you're talking about?
I would not be, no.
Okay, so then you admit that you're not a professional in this area?
No.
So if a panel of professionals said that talking to him for 6 hours was enough, who would you be to disagree with them?
I mean, I guess I wouldn't be, but I would be shocked if they came to that conclusion.
Okay. I wouldn't. I would say that person probably would be more understandable. Now, I would think that that person probably deserves some sort of punishment because we don't really want to encourage that vigilantism, right? But that's because I advocate for a system that's more about purely rehabilitation. But if you only advocate for rehabilitation, then who would you be to disagree? Right? That's a problem with you putting your faith into these people. Now, we can see professionals in this sort of system all the time. For example, we now see prosecutors, which arguably would be people that would be on this panel, people that are involved in rehabilitation in the criminal justice system. Prosecutors all the time recommend letting violent criminals off the hook because they say they're a good person, they're changed, etc. We see this in particular places with Soros-sponsored DAs, right? So once these people are back on the street, there's nothing we could do, right? We just say, well, we have to, whatever this panel of people says. I mean, it's just absolutely nonsensical.
Can I ask a hypothetical?
Sure.
All right. So imagine, imaginary cap on. We have a machine, right? It's like a little tanning bed. Somebody gets in it, takes like 10 minutes, and all of a sudden, like, you're guaranteed 100% no chance that this person commits another crime like that again.
So Minority
or any
Report.
crime in
That's what you're describing the plot of Minority Report.
I haven't seen it.
But it's not tanning beds, but it's very similar. There's these like mutant people that could see future crime, so they know whether or not anyone will commit a crime.
Yeah,
trust me, this movie is the scenario you're outlining. It's a little different because instead of you sitting in a booth, it's them, these like mutants, but they could tell whether or not people. Trust me, it doesn't end up in your favor in this. I believe it's a Philip K. Dick book. Doesn't work in the way you would think it would.
That's because that's about, I assume, like, telling whether a person will or will not. This machine doesn't tell; it just like makes it so they will not. It's 100%.
Oh, so it's not that it sees the future; it's that it somehow lobotomizes you to the point where it takes away your natural urges.
Sure, yeah, it doesn't change anything about the person's personality, but let's say like it does remove like any chance of them ever committing a violent crime again.
So lobotomy.
Would you? But it doesn't actually have any of the negative aspects that a lobotomy would have.
But wait a minute. Would you admit most crimes have to do with our personalities?
Absolutely.
Okay, so then you can't say that it won't change you. How would that be?
Well, I mean, it doesn't exist. I'm using it as a hypothetical to try to get to a second point. I think that, like, what I'm asking is, if we had this machine and somebody did commit a horrible, heinous crime, and we put them in this machine, the machine had a 100% success rate, you're guaranteed they're never going to commit the crime again. How long, in your mind, do they need to stay in prison?
Whatever the law says that the crime should be, that the sentence should be, to discipline. But this scenario is stupid anyways because you could completely end all crime by just putting every person in the machine that ends crime in the first place. So there would be no crime ever because everyone would just voluntarily acquiesce because it's a machine that doesn't lobotomize you. It just takes away all criminal urges whatsoever. So the scenario like falls flat in its face anyways. But yes, there's.
Yeah, but do you get what I'm trying to ask?
I get what you're saying. Your argument, right? You're going back to the point. You have to make some ridiculous because it sounds like what you're saying is like you're actually giving the rationalization for not just lobotomies, but something in my line of work I see all the time, which is the over drugging of people. So a lot of people have, like, for example, one of the diagnoses of people I work with a lot is called intermittent explosive disorder, and that's basically a catch-all for it's violent, and it's a fucked up situation. Like, it's difficult to talk about, but, there's a lot of people that, through maybe trauma that they've experienced in their life, plus when you add that on to, like, medical diagnosis, like significant seizures, autism, things of that nature, they're prone to what might seem like unprovoked violent outbursts. Now, most of the time, there is a provocation. It's not a provocation that would justify violent outbursts. You know what I mean? Like, a provocation to a person with autism could be, like, a loud sound or flashing light, or something like that. So I don't mean provocation like someone like giving them a wet willy or calling them names. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Right. So what happens, what I've seen in my line of work, oftentimes what happens is people come in like you and they'll be like, we need to give maximum freedom. And that's something I believe in. I want maximum freedom. Because you have to understand, these people aren't committing crimes, even if they technically commit crimes. They're not crimes because they wantonly acting in destruction for people, or they've made personal choices themselves which led to these crimes. They're people through no fault of their own have medical conditions. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep society safe. That's different than, say, a drug addict who makes the choice to be a drug addict and then under the influence of drugs rob someone, or someone who makes the choice to drink a bunch of booze then gets behind the wheel of a car. Those are choices that people have made. Even if you say, well, they had regrettable life circumstances that led them to those choices. It's different if you're a person with autism and you kind of have no idea what's going on, or a concept of what the law is, or something like that. Anyways, what I see happen is you'll have these doctors that are, or people in my companies and stuff that'll say things like, oh, well, we have to maximum freedom. There can't be any restraints whatsoever on this person. By the way, I work for a non-restraint company. I have zero interest in restraining anyone at any time. But nonetheless, some companies allow restraints. And these doctors and people say, no restraints, no restrictions whatsoever. We should take them into the community all the time. And then the predictable outcome is you get in the community and then a horn goes off and all of a sudden there's a violent outburst. And now a member of the community gets hurt. Some little girl that was sitting on a chair gets a chair thrown and it smacks her in the head and she ends up with stitches, right? Now, what happens is there's legal interventions, which you would be against, but inevitably the way they deal with this, and I've seen this over and over, you know what they do? They drugged them to the point where they're zombies. Now they can't even chew their food. You have to like help them have like sort of liquid consistency food. I've seen this happen multiple times to the point where I have to file reports where I'm like, this isn't humane. And the problem is this, the counter to the people of me saying it isn't humane. Well, what do you want to have happen? Do you think it's humane that we don't allow him in town with people? We don't allow him to go to the county fair or to the theme park, or that we restrain him? Do you think that's humane? Well, yes, I think that's more humane than drugging a person to the point where they don't know they exist anymore, right? And it sounds like, I understand your hypotheticals like, no, but we have a magic machine that takes away all the violent tendencies without doing that. But what I'm saying is, you're people like you that have this sort of like hippie mentality that's like, oh, no punishment whatsoever, man. And like, it's just all about like keeping people away until we know they won't commit crimes. This is going to end in fucking disaster. It's going to end in disaster. And you're not going to be the one paying the consequence. It's going to be a lot of people locked up for violent crimes that weren't really that bad, that traditionally would only be locked up for like 6 months. And a lot of people that are seeking vengeance themselves, with some of the worst people that know how to game the system, because all they'll have to do is convince a panel of people, it's cool, I'm good, that will be left out again. Did you see the guy on Rogan's show the other day? And did you see this headline from February?
I did not.
Okay.
But I want to quickly.
Go ahead.
That, like, again, I'm not for like the drugging of people. I've seen it too in like fields that I work. I don't want to dock myself or anything like that. But yeah, and some of these drugs have like very severe side effects in terms of like causing tremors and other things like that that are irreversible. And then they have to take lifelong medication to deal with that as well. It's really unfortunate, and it's not a good system that currently exists. I know that different people have, I guess, different abilities to make choices and decisions for themselves. How do you feel about people in the situation being given the option of, if you want to go and like go to like the park or go to like an area where you're around other people and potentially could be overstimulated with, I guess, I forget the word you were using, but a provocation, then you would take medication if you want to do those things. If you don't want to do those things, nobody's going to force you to do those things.
Yeah, I mean, there should be given as much choice as possible to an individual, particularly that has sort of a medical condition. But understand that, like, the primary role, we still need to have laws and law enforcement that enforce the laws in that moment, right? So, for example, I have a deep sympathy for the people I work with that have conditions like autism. That doesn't mean that if that person starts physically assaulting someone in public, that the police shouldn't intervene and that he shouldn't face legal consequences. Now, should it be a mitigating factor in the length of sentence or the treatment, the conditions that person has? Sure, but that's the status quo. And oftentimes the legal system is more favorable to people that provably have medical conditions that mean that they don't really understand the nature of the things they're doing. But with this sort of radical change that you're talking about, like, I just think that it's going to end up in so many perverse incentives and so many negative outcomes. This guy that was on Joe Rogan's show, for example, he was February 7th, I believe he was on the show of this year. He was advocating for criminal justice reform, mistreatment of prisoners in the legal system. He was accused of a violent crime, let go, considered an upstanding member of society.
Yeah,
he was with
someone. Yeah,
they just found a decapitated head and torso in his house. Now, this was someone that was so rehabilitated. He was actually friends or was associated in some ways with DA Alvin Bragg that's going after Trump. So he's someone who was writing books and was invited to schools. And here he is, he decapitated a person. Now, the reason I bring this up is it's clear that sometimes they get it wrong. They think that people are rehabilitated. And the more people with big hearts that are in those fields that want to default to listening to someone saying, oh, it's not that they're a criminal, they've rehabilitated, they're good now, we're not worried about punishment whatsoever. There are people that will be attracted to these boards, just like there are prosecutors that are attracted to getting into these fields and then letting violent criminals out and saying things like bail and other things like that are bad. Now, I think it's because they're intentionally releasing violent criminals, but let's say that it's not that. Let's say that it's that they have a big heart and sympathy for circumstances that puts people into a criminal mindset. It's easy to see how this system will be gamed, right? And I just think, I mean, again, you've already made some key concessions. I think you have no argument against the incentivization of vengeance because you would not punish those that commit vengeance. You have no argument.
I mean, I think like going, I guess I don't want to say you can't have it both ways, but in terms of like the argument that like every crime that's a violent crime is a lifelong sentence, and also there's like now incentivizing it, I don't see those adding up in terms of what you're critiquing about what I'm saying.
I didn't say every crime would be a lifelong sentence. I said, and you've conceded, that it is far likely that what would happen would be that people on average that were murderers would get less lengthy sentences than people that committed violent crimes like getting into bar fights or beating their spouse.
It depends on the type of murder as well, right?
Well, maybe but we're talking in general. Like there's serial killers, that would be a type of murder. There's crimes of passion. You know, you found your wife cheating on you. That's a type of murder. There's crimes of opportunity. You were robbing someone, right? Like, yeah, I'm saying all of those types of murders on average would probably end up with less sentences. So yeah, you're right. Maybe serial killers would still be detained longer. But
serial killers, mass shooters,
why mass shooter?
Gang-related crime.
Mass shooter would be let out.
No, I don't think so.
Do you think that mass shooters? Now, wait a minute. Let's be clear. The severity of the crime doesn't impact whatsoever whether or not they're left out. It's only whether they're likely to commit violence if left out. Correct?
Yeah. Well, so the majority of like people that like plan mass shootings have like ASPD.
Sure.
And like that's a issue that would be a massive, I would imagine a massive issue for this board because people with ASPD can be particularly manipulative.
Okay.
And therefore I would assume that they would take that into account and it would be a lot harder and they would want to see a lot of times where they'd say, oh, this person seems good, but like, let's see it a couple more times before we even consider it.
But again, we're talking about a mass school shooter. So a couple more times might be 10 years. Right now, it would be insane to think that a mass school shooter, like an Uvalde shooter, I believe that shooter was killed, but that shooter could be left out in 10 years. Because here's the problem here's the problem that you'll run into. Most mass shooters you'll probably be able to say would be diagnosed with significant psychosis, right? You would agree with that?
Maybe not psychosis, but the one guy tried to feign psychosis, but ASPD for sure.
Like some sort of mental disorder or something, correct?
Psychopathy, sociopathy,
correct. Yeah. That could be treated.
Not really, no.
Sure
Personality disorders like that don't really get treated.
Well, then the person that let's take two hypothetical people. We'll say they're twins, right? Or let's not even say that. Let's just say they're from the same time. Two people, right? One is diagnosed with multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, whatever, right? And they get in a fight outside the bar. The other same diagnosis, and they do a mass shooting. The chances of them being released is both the same, correct? Both have the same diagnosis, both engaged in an act of violence. The severity of the act of violence does not come into factor. All that comes into factor is will they be likely to commit another act of violence if we let them out? So those two people, if they have the exact same diagnosis and their behavior when talking to the psychiatrist about whether or not they commit violence, the reason for the violence, etc., is the exact same, they would both have the equal chance to be left out.
I think when we're talking about something like schizophrenia, though, it really depends on what is the driving factor. If they're experiencing command hallucinations that are telling them to get into a bar fight, that's very different and a different level of a threat and concern than somebody that's getting command hallucinations that are telling them to go shoot up people.
But you said the severity of the crime shouldn't be relevant. The only thing that should be relevant is whether or not they're likely to be recidivist. So are they likely to commit an act of violence again? And I'll even give you're saying, well, I'm not just saying the serial or the mass shooter should be let go if he won't commit a mass shooting. I'm saying, and he also won't commit other random acts of violence. So maybe they think, look, he would never escalate to that point, but we could see this guy getting out and punching people in the supermarket. So we're not going to let him out, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I also think that, like, in the cases of mass shooting as well, like, do you know Anders Breivik, the guy from I think it was Norway, maybe, or Finland, Sweden, whatever, one of those countries. They have a maximum prison sentence of, I think, 26 years, and he's going to be coming up on that at some point.
Yep.
I do not think they're going to release him. I think they're going to have him go in front of a medical board, and they're going to say he's not ready. Because if they do release him, again, he would be a target. They would have to put him in protective custody and things like that, which comes back to kind of the point that you were making as well. I think in the cases of, like, people that are like mass shooters or things like that, I think that if releasing them becomes more difficult in that regard as well, because there's such a higher risk of vengeance being played out.
So wait, now you think we should factor in whether vengeance will be committed to how long someone's detained?
In terms of their own safety, yeah. When it comes
come
to
on. Now it's getting crazy. Okay, so then
when it comes to like crimes like mass shootings, but I think it's
why just mass shootings? What about sexual offenses against children? You don't think they're likely to suffer vengeance?
I think if it's like one person that did it to one person, then probably not, because there's thousands and we don't know their name. If it's like a Jeffrey Epstein type, then like, yeah, they're absolutely likely.
Imagine like oh my God, you see how this is falling apart. So now imagine this: you're someone who commits this crime, and you're not interested in punishment. So you commit a crime, and you go in front of the board, and the board will just say is required to tell you their honest thoughts, and they say, we honestly think you're cured. We honestly don't think you're a danger to anyone. But we're still going to involuntarily detain you because we're afraid if we let you go, someone will commit an act of vengeance against you. And so now, sorry, go back to jail.
Well, I think
do you realize how absurd that sounds?
But
I mean, that's absurd.
Would you not try to put them in witness protection?
Well, that's different. That's different completely. So you're still letting them out of jail?
Yeah, I think, but like what I'm saying is, like, in a case of like somebody like Anders Breivik, those are their two options: of witness protection or keep him incarcerated. I think they're going to err on the side of keeping him incarcerated.
Why? It has nothing to do with what you just said. Then, if it's about just protecting him,
I think it's protecting him, and they also do not. I don't think they're going to be convinced that he's safe to be let out.
So then, what you're saying is the severity of the crime would impact whether or not they think that there could be the possibility of actually being cured from being a recidivist.
Sure, yeah, I do think that certain crimes, and like the severity, I guess, implies like the harm done by the crime. So,
but that has nothing to do with recidivism.
Are aligned, not all the time, yeah.
I mean, that has nothing to do with recidivism, though, right? Like, because again, the idea, this is why your system, because right now what we say is, look, we have different, it's not perfect. I think there's a lot of problems with our legal system, but we say there are arguably sentences that are longer for crimes we consider more heinous. But that has to do with the idea of punishment, right? Not the idea, because again, if the only factor is we are not interested in punishing you whatsoever, we are only interested in rehabilitation, then certainly you could see easily a hypothetical where someone commits the most heinous act possible, a mass school shooting of young people, right? That 30 years from now, you could say they're a completely cured person. Right? We just don't see that. We've been watching them closely for the past 15 years, and so we think that they should be left out. Like, you could see that hypothetically easily coming, whereas you could see someone who was detained for getting into a bar fight continue to show like forms of aggression and things like that in the prison and say, no, 30 years later, we still don't see it. That's an insane. And it seems to say you're having your cake and eating it too, because on one hand you're saying rehabilitation is the only thing that matters, and on the other hand you're saying, but for certain really heinous crimes, we should be highly skeptical that rehabilitation is possible. That seems to be antithetical to sort of your overarching message here.
No, because I think that so when you're looking at rehabilitation in terms of like the harm that is done, I think knowing that there's a chance that you get it wrong, if you get it wrong in a higher stakes game, I think that matters a little bit more. But yeah, you're still focusing on largely whether this person seems like they are fit to return to society.
Okay, real quick. I got like 10 minutes, but you did want to get to the part about nonviolent crime, right?
Yeah, sure. We can maybe do it another night. I do want to also pick your brain about substance use.
Okay.
because you made a comment about Narcan earlier of like, how many overdoses before we cut it, and like federal funds shouldn't be used for people with addiction. Unless I misunderstood that.
Oh, you want me to elaborate on that? No, it's difficult, right? Because I think what happens is you go in meaning well and you're like, we'll provide. I said we should use Narcan. I think that's. I can't be what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not all in or all against the idea of using tax dollars to deal with problems with people with drug use and substance use, right? So I think that there's right. This is a problem when you aren't a complete authoritarian government worshiper or a complete anarchist, right? The problem you're always going to have is a question of thresholds. For example, if I say, what should the speed limit be? An anarchist says, there should be no speed limit. The government has no right to tell me how fast I could drive, right? The complete authoritarian would say, the government has the right to tell you exactly what speed you must drive in every instance, right? Any of us elsewise would say like, well, there's a threshold, right? There's a point where we say, yeah, this would be a good speed limit. And so let's say I say, I don't know, I think like on the interstate, 70 mile an hour seems like a reasonable speed limit. And you might be like, what about 71? Why is 70 okay, but not 71? And there's always going to be this difficult threshold argument. So given that, like, I don't think that we should have massive amounts of spending to the point of absurdity in places you see like San Francisco, where in the name of trying to help the drug users, we're giving out free needles, we're giving out free apartments, which is increasing drug use, increasing overdoses, increasing crime rates, and declining the quality of life in stores and all sorts of places all throughout that city. I think that's obviously a huge mistake. Nor do I think we should have a society where, well, we're paying the ambulance driver or we're paying the police officer with tax funds, and they see a guy overdosing on the side of the sidewalk and they just kick him in the ribs and say, hey pal, we're not allowed to help you, we're on the government's dole, so we can't help you. So I don't want to see that either. So for me, I think that we have to encourage some form of self-reliance. If we're going to have a country that allows legal drug use, then we have to say, then you're responsible for the consequences largely. There should be emergency measures that are able to be used, but like, at some point we have to put a limit on that sort of stuff. So I'm not a big fan of, taxpayer facilities for people that are recidivists, that continue to do the same things over and over and over with substance abuse. We keep giving them more and more chances to the tune of 10. I mean, I think some studies were showing some of the like homeless people we were on average between housing and other benefits, San Francisco was paying like $80-something thousand a year. That's fucking insane. And it's making the problem worse, not better. So at some point you have to put a cap on these sort of things. I'm comfortable just thinking off the top of my head being like, I'm comfortable with, some Narcan and things like that, police officers being trained, providing first aid to people that are overdosing, things like that, trying to get treatment once people are incarcerated. So some sort of, having Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and organizations like that be able to come into prisons and try to get people help in those sorts of ways. But beyond that, I'm hesitant to incentivize any sort of poor behavior.
Well, I mean, so I had a friend that used to work at a detox, and he would tell me about it and tell me stories about it. And he would describe, sometimes seeing the same people come in 4 times in a span of 6 or 7 months. They'd come in, they'd get clean, and then they'd go back out. And you'd see it for different reasons, where some people, they just wanted a warm bed and meals 3 times a day. And you'd see other people that, they did actually want to get better, but they just kept falling on their face every time they went back out. And he described, the issue of, people would come back and, he'd be sad about it, but he'd also, never want to shame people for coming back, because he'd always want to encourage that behavior of, yeah. And I kind of feel the same way about, I don't think people should be cut off at any point where it's they've had enough chances, just write them off at this point.
But that's with all due respect, it's 2 different things, right? me as an individual thinking, should a person be cut? This is very difficult. You have to understand, like, our legal system is an extension of our government, and our government's just an extension of the collective will of the people, that we're willing to give up some of our autonomy, some of our property, because we think it'll make society better as a collective, right? So me personally wanting something, I look at the homeless guy in the street and I say, damn, I'm going to give that guy money. I'm going to help him get a meal. I'm going to help him with a job resume. I'm going to help him get clothes. I could believe that, but saying I think the government should have to do that isn't the same thing. Because when I say the government should have to do that, the argument that I'm de facto making is I think you and everyone watching should be forced to provide that, because that's what it is. I'm now, against your will, forcing some of your autonomy and some of your possessions to go towards helping this person. There are limits that we say, even though that is arguably theft, I'm willing to say it is net beneficial to society to have some of that we should have limited amount of programs. But how much should we do to say it's unlimited? Like, that's nonsensical. Your friend that works there, of course, is someone who works there. He's going to say if it was up to him, he probably, if he works somewhere like that, I'm just guessing, I bet he's not becoming wealthy. He probably does it because he loves it. Right? Because he really wants to help people. And so, of course, you as an individual aren't going to be like, well, that guy, we should cut him off. No more chances for him. But the question your friend needs to reasonably ask is, how much should the taxpayers continue to pay for that person that doesn't seem to want to help himself or do what's necessary to help himself? How far are we willing to go with it?
I mean, again, this is like, what number could you put on a life, right? In terms of
you have to, though. Right, because think of the logical extension of this. It doesn't just become people that make bad decisions like drug addicts. You can make I know we've had debates like this in the past, but you can make the same argument with the border, right? You could say any person that we think has a sad story that would be made beneficial by coming in this country, we should let go. Because how much money can you put on a life? Well, that could be 2 billion people. And then how do you tell the 2 billion and 1th person once you say, okay, that's it. Now we're at the point where if we bring in even one more person, it will have a diminishing quality of life for everyone else to the point that would outweigh. How do you tell that last person, sorry, you can't come in? You can't do that. You got to let that person in, and then the next, and then the next. And the problem is, what happens is you run into this problem. And it's a problem that obviously is easier to understand at the government level, how it could quickly get to a scope that gets out of hand. But it also applies to your personal life. Right? Like, for example, you might be a parent. Let's say I have a son, right? And let's say, hypothetically, I legitimately give a shit about all the kids in my county, which I do. I care about all the people. I hope everyone does well, right? But if I help the rest of those kids to the detriment of my own family, I'm not doing any good at all. Because now my family needs help from someone else because I've spent in a way. And let's say if I'm spending on my family, I'm spending in a way that's at least intelligible enough to make sure that my kid's getting an education, he's being fed, things that will lead to him inevitably being a relatively healthy, productive member of society. But maybe if I'm giving this money to other parents for their kids, they're blowing it at the bar. Or, they're going on vacation. But I still keep saying, but I feel bad for that kid. I can't put a cost on that kid. I can't put a cost on that, right? And so now I've spent that money in such a way where now I'm just another person that needs help. There comes a point where you have to say that you can't look at the world through this lens of just sort of this like hippie utopia where you're like, no, we can help everyone at all costs. That's just not reality. It's not. At some point, you have to have limits.
Yeah, no, I do understand that there are limitations to how much you can do, and you have to sometimes bite that bullet. I think, though, and I will give you credit here, that you are, I think, one of the people that is outspoken on this as well, in terms of, like, not being a neocon or anything like that. But I see a lot of people make similar arguments in terms of, like, focusing on, like, money that is going to homeless people or money that is going to people with addictions. And they don't have, like, a thing to say in terms of, like, how much we spend on our military or how much we're sending in arms to different countries.
Welfare is a big one. They'll complain about welfare that goes to the poor person, but corporate welfare they don't have shit to say about.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think our military is a massive fucking thing that is being the money is not even being, it's like, money is not being spent well really anywhere in our government, like especially in schools and things like that. But I think like the military is like the peak of all that, where we just like send shit over there and then like we don't even want to bring it back. We just blow it up because like that's easier.
Yeah, I mean, think about it, right. You could say this, like, let's say, and I'm just pulling numbers straight out of my ass, but you'll get the theme of what I'm saying. Let's say for every military service member, the spending we have amounts to $200,000 per service member. So I don't know how many. You see what I'm saying hypothetically, like what that number would be?
Yeah.
And you could say, okay, the service member gets paid benefits of about $50,000, and $150,000 of that dollars is literally just fucking blown. Like, it's just like, we sent it to some country and we don't know where it went, whatever. Like, you could hypothetically make the argument, well, no, that spending's, the number's okay. It's just how we allocate it's wrong, right? That maybe that service member deserves to get paid $125,000, right? And then less spending on bases in fucking Germany. Or, you know what I mean? Which it's stupid. Why are we there? So I see what you're saying. Now, those numbers are obviously bullshit. I don't know what those numbers are. But what I'm saying is...
Yeah, I get the point, though.
Right. Like, for example, we have a problem with people that have legitimately, probably through no will of their own, really, been forced to fight overseas in places like Afghanistan, which I know people that fought, and I know people that died in Afghanistan. And one of the things that I think that is so fucking insane to me about Afghanistan was... I don't know, maybe Vietnam was like this as well, but when we think of like heroic war stories like the Civil War or you know, the Revolution, maybe even going up to World War I or II, right? Like, you kind of knew who the bad guy was, right? You're a German and you're fighting the Americans on this battle. Like, you kind of understood that, right? Like, I had friends that were in Afghanistan that would train the Afghan security forces, and they knew damn well at night we're moonlighting as soldiers for the Taliban. So you're literally training people in the day that might be shooting at you in the evening. Imagine how fucked up that would be. Like,
it's well known that the U.S. military did train the Mujahideen
of course.
When they were battling against Russia. And then
of course, but I'm
I'm
talking like in real time. Imagine that you're training some Afghani, like, here's how you shoot a gun, and here's how here's all the process of being a more effective soldier, knowing full well that there's a chance that dude could be shooting at you that night, right? And you're relying on that guy to some extent to have your back if you get in a firefight. And that's the dude you're relying on. Like, imagine how fucking wild that would be. How, like shell-shocked you would get. And I know people that came back and have PTSD, and maybe the conflict wasn't as intense as World War II or as intense as Vietnam. But, like, I could see how that every night, like, at least knowing that your brothers are watching your back in World War II, that's at least some comfort that you're not getting in that Afghanistan conflict. Nonetheless, I'm not an expert on what the most horrific conflict was. I'm just saying, imagine that person. You go over there, and now you have legitimate medical conditions. Maybe you were wounded, maybe not. Maybe you just have PTSD. And you got to fight tooth and nail to get medical care? Like, you're treated like a fucking piece of garbage? And I only bring this up, and I'm sure you agree. I only bring this up, like, part of saying, like, we spend so much money on the military. There are things that we still should be spending more on. It's just we spend way too much on all of this frivolous shit. So the total amount of money we're spending should be significantly decreased, don't get me wrong. But that doesn't mean that I'm looking at the soldiers saying, and you deserve less. Quite the opposite. I'm saying you shouldn't be in all of these overseas conflicts, and we shouldn't be sending a bunch of money to fucking Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and all these fucking places, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think, again, although, like, Vietnam was very brutal, like, war is war, right? I don't think, like, anybody comes out of it unscathed. I think the most brutal battle, though, was probably Stalingrad, but that's, like...
Yeah, it wasn't us, though, those damn Ruskies, right? So who cares, right? No, it is, and, like, look, I will agree. Listen, I'm not the type of... As annoying as I find your position, I understand having a big heart, right? What's the idea of, like, we need to treat everyone with humanity and humility and understand that we're all able to commit sin and do bad things, and that capacity's in all of us, and so we need to have that sort of grace when dealing with other people. I just think it's utopian hippie bullshit. However, there are certainly people that go the other way with it, too. And that's people that are like, you know, fuck it, bomb the Middle East and make it a parking lot. That's fucking insane. Like, you're talking about killing millions of people, that most of which are probably, like, if I could say my government doesn't represent me, like, I vehemently was against going to the Iraq war. Imagine that somehow someone in Iraq becomes powerful enough to challenge the U.S. military, maybe with some heinous weapon of mass destruction or something. Do I deserve to be wiped out because my government took actions against my interests that the average person in this country had no fucking control over? I don't think so. I feel the same way about the people of Iraq. I feel the same way about the people of Gaza. or North Korea. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes you don't have to make the terrible decision that you need to go to war and that's going to have civilian casualties, etc. But I don't look at it so blithely that I'm like, fuck those people, I don't care. I don't look at it like that. I think that, regrettably, sometimes war is inevitable and necessary, but I certainly feel terrible for people even on the other side, even the soldiers. Like, you feel bad. You understand, like, look, they're just doing... I watched this story, this guy on Twitter the other day, he was a World War II or Vietnam vet, and he was talking about... It was brutal. He was scared, and he's there, and he's running across this hill, and he gets there, and he sees the enemy soldier, and he could see his eyes, and the guy just smiled and dropped his gun. And he's like, I shot him in the head. And, like, think of that moment, what that means. Like, it's fucking brutal, like, to think about that. Thank God I've never had to go through anything like that. But, I mean, that's a story that you hear that story, and it affects me so much. And it's like, now multiply that millions of times. Of people in just the last century alone that have fought in wars and had even more horrific stories than that. You know, it is people, even on the other, even you look at people we consider, you know, the communists, you know, fighting for the Soviets, or, you know, the Nazis fighting under Hitler. Yeah, of course the leadership's grotesque and heinous, but a lot of those people were just fucking young soldiers. They ain't making political decisions. They're given a gun and say, go point. These people are trying to kill your way of life. Okay. You know, and that also, by the way, applies to the prison area, prison, where I think that we, you know, there's a lot of people that are like, fuck it, they got it too good. And I couldn't disagree more. If you want to increase the sentences of child predators and stuff, I'm with you. You take it to the max, fine by me. But we shouldn't say, ha ha ha, anyone who goes to prison's now basically involved in psychological torture, because maybe it'll be you someday. Maybe you'll be there for being a political prisoner, or maybe you'll in a desperate moment steal money from your job and then get sentenced to 5 years. Or maybe you're smoking a little reefer and you get behind the wheel of a car and you tragically do something that lands you in prison. Do you want to be in that system where you're basically fighting for your life every day, even if you committed a nonviolent crime?
It's awful. I also think, like, going quickly back to the war aspect, I assume you'll probably agree with this, though. I mean, it all stems from, like, the fact that we allow money in politics and we allow lobbying, and, like, the U.S. military-industrial complex, in terms of the arms manufacturers that exist within the United States, make massive amounts of donations to political figures. And then it's like a shark that needs to keep swimming. If we're not constantly in a conflict or constantly selling weapons to somebody, then, you know, it'll completely go under, which is why I said, you know, when we pulled out of Afghanistan, which was, like, credit to Trump's idea, credit to Biden, he did it. Credit to both of them. It was executed poorly under Trump's plan, but done by Biden.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, for me, again, I cheered for the withdrawal of Afghanistan under Biden. I give him credit for it. The way it was implemented was terrible. I'm slightly a conspiracy. Oh my God, you all right?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say. Sorry,
it sounded like you were falling there.
my mic fucking up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, no. When we pulled out of Afghanistan, we would have found another country to invade probably within the next 2 years had Russia, Ukraine not popped off. But because it did, we were like, oh, goody. We don't need to invade another country. We can send arms over there, and we just need to rally the troops, justify it, run the campaigns, and then now we have another outlet for our military spending.
Yeah, and like,
and now,
I mean, look, this will get me called a crazy conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying this happened, but I'm saying our system is so perverse, incentivized to encourage these sort of conflicts. This is half of what I think is likely to have happened. I think Joe Biden was picked because he's an empty suit, because he is an old, confused man, and he's willing to do basically what his handlers tell him. But my gut feeling is on Afghanistan, he put his foot down. And he was like, no, we're pulling out. And I wonder if that didn't piss off the people. And they were like, okay, if you're going to insist we pull out, then we're going to make it a shit show so that you have egg on your face. And then next time we get into a conflict and someone says we should pull out, we'll say, remember Afghanistan? Remember what happened? Right?
I mean, that's very possible. Yeah, I don't know. I think, again, like, it was rushed and it was sloppy. It was like, get the troops home by, like, Christmas, and, like, the time kept getting pushed, and they were definitely under a lot of pressure to get people out, but the way that they did it was, like, completely a shit show.
Yeah, it just, so I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to incompetence or corruption, and which answer is worse, I don't know. It's bad, but all right, I got to get going. I was supposed to be done 20 minutes ago, but no, I appreciate you calling in. I hope all is well with you, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation, even though we don't see eye to eye on many things. We see eye to eye on some things, though. So.
I don't know how old you are, but hopefully 15 years from now you'll look back and go, yeah, it was a dumb idea. I can see why it was dumb. We'll see. All right, man.
We'll see. Take care.
All right, we'll see you. All right, I'll be wrapping up here shortly. So, Key Lime, friend of the show, terrible positions, but at least he's honest and consistent, which is something that I think I wish more people were. Key Lime will bite the bullet and say which is monstrous, but at least it's honest, that 9-month abortion should be allowed. Because he believes it should be solely between a woman and her doctor. I think it's crazy. It's a crazy, but, All right, I probably won't be streaming the weekend, so maybe you'll hear from me Monday. Like I said, the next thing I have lined up, I'm still waiting to hear back from Tim Pool's show. But I am doing a panel Wednesday with some lefties, I think. Lauren De Laguna, I don't really know. Hutch, who I vaguely know. So it should be fun. Oh, and Pondering will be there as well. So should be fun. Anyways, I appreciate everyone being here tonight. Let's see if I can find someone to raid. I'm going to close down now the spaces. Thank you so much, Janice, holding it out there. I'm going to close the space. I'll still be on YouTube and Twitch for a couple seconds, just enough time to raid someone. Thank you all so much that were listening on the space. I really appreciate it. Tune in pretty much every weeknight around 8 p.m. Eastern, sometimes an hour earlier, sometimes an hour later, but I'm usually here. So we'll end that space. Thanks so much. All right, and for the rest of you, let's find someone to raid. No. What did I do there? Oh, I see what I did. Okay. Let's find someone to raid on Twitch, and then we'll get out of here. Who's available tonight? EOD. We'll go with Venturous. We rated EOD. If you're feeling adventurous, good guy. Him and his, I think it's his wife. I think I got to the bottom of that. It's a man and a woman. They're a lot of fun. I think you'll enjoy them. Oh, and special thanks to Imaginarium for ruining my evening by letting me know that I don't actually have 171 people watching on Twitter right now. You bastard! No, I appreciate it because I would have been a fool. I probably wouldn't have done the spaces had I known that was not the accurate number. Alrighty. Thank you so much, everyone. Yes, thank you. My new $7 hat. I enjoy it. Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you, Key Lime, for being here. Thank you, everyone else. I really appreciate you all. I will see you probably Monday night. As always, have a good one.